Section 1 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Ancient Greek Story. The Cranes of Ibycus by William Byron Forbush. The Singer and the Birds. Ibycus was a great singer. He journeyed all over the land, carrying with him his light harp, and singing to the people. One day he was going to the musical games of Corinth, where all the singers of Greece were hastening to try for the great prize. It was in the springtime, when Proserpine comes gladly back to earth, and he was so happy that he sang all the way. As he walked along, he heard, overhead, the harsh cries of some cranes who were returning to their home. He smiled as he looked up and saw the great flock of grey birds, with their long legs and strong outspread wings, coming back from their winter on the golden sands of Egypt to dance and bow to each other in the marshes near his home. "Welcome back, little brothers," he cried. "May you and I meet nothing but kindness this summer from the people of this land." Then the cranes again harshly cried, as if in answer, and the singer walked gaily on and passed into the shadows of a dark woods. Before he knew or could defend himself, two cruel robbers that were hiding in the darkness sprang out and cast him to the ground. He cried in vain for help, and as he was dying he heard only the harsh voice of the birds and the rush of their speeding wings. He looked up to them. "Speak for me, dear cranes," he said, "since no one but you answers me." The cranes screamed hoarsely and mournfully as they flapped their way towards Corinth and left the beautiful singer lying dead. When his body was found, there was great grief in Corinth. One of his friends, as he bent over his body, said, "And I was hoping to place the laurel wreath on your head when you were victor in the singing." At length the great day came, and all the singers of Greece gathered in the theatre, where Ibycus had hoped to be among them. First the chorus walked upon the stage, but it was not the usual chorus of young girls and boys of Corinth. Those who sang that day were old women, dressed in black, and they carried in their bony hands torches blazing with a pitchy flame. These were the Furies. The Furies were the terrible ones who visited earth to punish murder and treachery. As they marched in a circle, they sang, "Happy is the man whose heart is pure from guilt and crime. Woe to him who has done a deed of secret murder. Does he think he will escape us? If he runs, we run faster. Never wearying, we chase him. No pity holds us back. We give no peace, no rest." The terrified people listened to them. Suddenly the Furies stopped. When their voices ceased, all the people looked upward. There, harshly crying, passed overhead the flock of cranes to whom Ibycus the singer had given his dying message. One voice from the topmost benches was heard to cry out with horror, "See, see, see, comrade, the cranes of Ibycus!" Seize him, all cried together. "These are the murderers of Ibycus." The startled men denied that they were guilty. Trembling they tried to run away. But the roaring multitude, like an angry sea, leapt upon them and crushed them. And that night, in the evening twilight, the grey-winged, rosy-headed cranes flew on to the marshes, there to bow to each other and dance in the golden sunset, well content because they had spoken their message, the message from Ibycus, the great singer. End of section 1, read by Alan Mapstone in Oxford, England.
Section 2 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Medieval European Story, How the Proud Emperor Was Humbled, by Manuel Komroff. When Jovinian was emperor, he possessed very great power, and as he lay in bed reflecting upon the extent of his dominions, his heart was elated to an extraordinary degree. "Is there," he impiously asked, "is there any other god than me?" Amid such thoughts he fell asleep. In the morning he reviewed his troops, and said, "My friends, after breakfast we will hunt." Preparations being made accordingly, he set out with a large retinue. During the chase, the emperor felt such extreme oppression from the heat that he believed his very existence depended upon a cold bath. As he anxiously looked around, he discovered a sheet of water at no great distance. "Remain here," said he to his guard, "until I have refreshed myself in yonder stream." Then spurring his steed, he rode hastily to the edge of the water. Alighting, he divested himself of his apparel, and experienced the greatest pleasure from its invigorating freshness and coolness. But whilst he was thus employed, a person similar to him in every respect, in countenance and gesture, arrayed himself unperceived in the emperor's dress, and then mounting his horse, rode off to the attendants. The resemblance to the sovereign was such that no doubt was entertained of the reality, and when the sport was over, command was issued for the return to the palace. Jovinian, however, having quitted the water, sought in every possible direction for his horse and clothes, and to his utter astonishment could find neither. Vexed beyond measure at the circumstance, for he was completely naked, and saw no one near to assist him, he began to reflect upon what course he should pursue. "Miserable man that I am," said he, "to what a strait I am reduced! There is, I remember, a knight residing close by, whom I have promoted to a military post. I will go to him and command his attendance and service. I will then ride on to the palace and strictly investigate the cause of this extraordinary conduct." Jovinian proceeded, naked and ashamed, to the castle of the aforesaid knight, and beat loudly at the gate. The porter inquired the cause of the knocking. "Open the gate," said the enraged emperor, "and you will see who I am." The gate was opened, and the porter, struck with the strange appearance he exhibited, replied, "In the name of all that is marvellous, what are you?" "I am," said he, "Jovinian, your emperor. Go to your lord and command him from me to supply the wants of his sovereign. I have lost both horse and clothes." "Thou liest, infamous ribald," shouted the porter. "Just before thy approach, the Emperor Jovinian, accompanied by officers of this household, entered the palace. My lord both went and returned with him, but even now sat with him at meat. Because thou hast called thyself the emperor, my lord shall know of thy presumption." The porter entered and related what had passed. Jovinian was introduced, but the knight retained not the slightest recollection of his master, although the emperor remembered him. "Who are you?" said the former, "and what is your name?" "I am the Emperor Jovinian," rejoined he. "Canst thou have forgotten me? At such a time I promoted thee to a military command." "Why, thou most audacious scoundrel," said the knight, Darest thou call thyself the emperor? I rode with him myself to the palace, from whence I am this moment returned. But thy impudence shall not go without its reward. Flog him, said he, turning to his servants, flog him soundly, and drive him away. This sentence was immediately executed, and the poor emperor, bursting into a convulsion of tears, exclaimed, O my God, is it possible that one whom I have so much honoured and exalted should do this? Not content with pretending ignorance of my person, he orders these merciless villains to abuse me. His next thought within himself, there is a certain duke, one of my privy councillors, to whom I will make known my calamity. At least he will enable me to return decently to the palace. To him, therefore, Jovinian proceeded, and the gate was opened at his knock. But the porter, beholding a naked man, exclaimed in the greatest amaze, Friend, who are you, and why come you here in such a guise? He replied, I am your emperor. I have accidentally lost my clothes and my horse, and I have come for succour to your lord. I beg you, therefore, to do me this errand to the duke. The porter, more and more astonished, entered the hall, and communicated the strange intelligence which he had received. Bring him in, said the duke. He was brought in, but neither did he recognize the person of the emperor. What art thou? He asked. I am the emperor, replied Jovinian, and I have promoted thee to riches and honour, since I made thee a duke and one of my councillors. Poor mad wretch, said the duke, a short time since I returned from the palace, where I left the very emperor thou assumest to be. But since thou hast claimed such rank, thou shalt not escape unpunished. Carry him to prison, and feed him with bread and water. The command was no sooner delivered than obeyed, and the following day his naked body was submitted to the lash, and he was again cast into the dungeon. Thus afflicted, he gave himself up to the wretchedness of his undeserved condition. In the agony of his heart he said, What shall I do? Or what shall be my destiny? I am loaded with the coarsest insolence, and exposed to the malicious observation of my people. It were better to hasten immediately to my palace, and there discover myself. My servants will know me, and even if they do not, my wife will know me. Escaping, therefore, from his confinement, he approached the palace and beat upon the gate. Who art thou? Said the porter. It is strange, replied the aggrieved emperor. It is strange that thou shouldest not know me, thou who hast served me so long. Serve thee, returned the porter indignantly, thou liest abominably. I have served none but the emperor. Why, said the other, thou knowest that I am he. Yet though you disregard my words, go, I implore you, to the empress. Communicate what I will tell thee, and by these signs bid her send the imperial robes, of which some rogue has deprived me. These signs I tell thee of are known to none but to ourselves. In verity, said the porter, thou art mad. At this very moment my lord sits at table with the empress herself. Nevertheless, out of regard for thy singular merits, I will intimate thy declaration within, and rest assured thou wilt presently find thyself most royally beaten. The porter went accordingly, and related what he had heard. But the empress became very sorrowful, and said, O my lord, what am I to think? The most hidden passages of our lives are revealed by an obscene fellow at the gate, and repeated to me by the porter, on the strength of which he declares himself the emperor and my espoused lord. When the fictitious monarch was apprised of this, he commanded him to be brought in. He had no sooner entered than a large dog, which couched upon the hearth, had been much cherished by him, flew at his throat, and, but for timely prevention, would have killed him. A falcon also, seated upon her perch, no sooner beheld him than she broke the leather straps and flew out of the hall. Then the pretended emperor, addressing those who stood about him, said, My friends, hear what I will ask of yon ribald. Who are you, and what do you want? "These questions," said the suffering man, "are very strange. You know I am the emperor and master of this place." The other, turning to the nobles who sat or stood at the table, continued, "Tell me, on your allegiance, which of us two is your lord and master?" "Your Majesty asks us an easy thing," replied they, "and need not to remind us of our allegiance. That obscene wretch we have never seen before. You alone are he, whom we have known from childhood, and we entreat that this fellow may be severely punished, as a warning to others how they give scope to their mad presumption." Then turning to the Empress, the usurper said, "Tell me, my lady, on the faith you have sworn, do you know this man who calls himself thy lord and emperor?" She answered, "My lord, how can you ask such a question? Have I not known thee more than 30 years, and borne thee many children? Yet, at one thing I do admire. How can this fellow have acquired so intimate a knowledge of what has passed between us?" The pretended emperor made no reply, but addressing the real one said, "Friend, how darest thou to call thyself emperor? We sentence thee, for this unexampled impudence, to be drawn, without loss of time, at the tail of a horse. And if thou utterest the same words again, thou shalt be doomed to an ignominious death." He then commanded his guards to see the sentence put in force, but to preserve his life. The unfortunate emperor was now almost distracted, and urged by his despair, wished vehemently for death. "Why was I born?" he exclaimed. "My friends shun me, and my wife and children will not acknowledge me. But there is my confessor still, to whom I will go. Perhaps he will recollect me, because he has often received my confessions." He went accordingly and knocked at the window of his cell. "Who is there?" said the confessor. "The Emperor Jovinian," was the reply. "Open the window, and I will speak to thee." The window was opened, but no sooner had he looked out than he closed it again in great haste. "Depart from me," said he, "accursed thing. Thou art not the emperor, but the devil incarnate." This completed the miseries of the persecuted man, and he tore his hair, and plucked up his beard by the roots. "Woe is me," he cried, "for what strange doom am I reserved?" At this crisis the impious words which, in the arrogance of his heart, he had uttered, crossed his recollection. Immediately he beat again at the window of the confessor's cell, and exclaimed, "For the love of him who was suspended from the cross, hear my confession with the window closed." The recluse said, "I will do this with pleasure," and then Jovinian acquainted him with every particular of his past life, and principally how he had lifted himself up against his Maker, saying that he believed there was no other God but himself. The confession made and absolution given, the recluse opened the window and directly knew him. "Blessed be the Most High God," said he, "now I do know thee. I have here a few garments. Clothe thyself and go to the palace. I trust that they also will recognize thee." The emperor did as the confessor directed. The porter opened the gate, and made a low obeisance to him. "Dost thou know me?" said he. "Very well, my lord," replied the menial, "but I marvel that I did not observe you go out." Entering the hall of his mansion, Jovinian was received by all with a profound reverence. The strange emperor was at the time in another apartment with the queen, and a certain knight came out of the chamber, looked narrowly at Jovinian, and returning to the supposed emperor, said, "My lord, there is one in the hall to whom everybody bends. He so much resembles you, that we know not which is the emperor." Hearing this, the usurper said to the empress, "Go and see if you know him." She went, and returned greatly surprised at what she saw. "Oh, my lord," said she, "I declare to you that I know not whom to trust." "Then," returned he, "I will go and convince you." When he had entered the hall, he took Jovinian by the hand and placed him near him. Addressing the assembly, he said, By the oaths you have taken, declare which of us is your emperor." The emperess answered, "It is my duty to speak first, but heaven is my witness that I am unable to determine which is he." And so said all. Then the feigned emperor spoke thus: "My friends, hearken. That man is your king and your lord. He exalted himself to the disparagement of his Maker, and God therefore scourged and hid him from your knowledge. I am the angel that watches over his soul, and I have guarded his kingdom while he was undergoing his penance. But his repentance removes the rod. He has now made ample satisfaction, and again let your obedience wait upon him. Commend yourselves to the protection of heaven." So saying, he disappeared. The emperor gave thanks to God, and lived happily, and finished his days in peace. End of section 2.
Section 3 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Renaissance European Stories. Fables of Laurentius, Abstemius, by Manuel Komroff. A Swallow and a Spider. A spider that observed a swallow catching flies fell immediately to work upon a net to catch swallows, for she looked upon it as an encroachment upon her right. But the birds, without any difficulty, break through the work and fly away with the very net itself. "Well," says the spider, "bird catching is none of my talent, I perceive." And so she returned to her old trade of catching flies again. A Swan and a Stork. A stork that was present at the song of a dying swan told her 'twas contrary to nature to sing so much out of season, and asked her the reason of it. "Why," says the swan, "I am now entering into a state where I shall be no longer in danger of either snares, guns, or hunger, and who would not joy at such a deliverance?" Capons, fat and lean. There were a great many crammed capons together in a coop, some of them very fair and fat, and others again that did not thrive upon feeding. The fat ones would ever and anon making sport with the lean, and calling them starvelings, till in the end the cook was ordered to dress so many capons for supper, and to be sure to take the best in the pen. When it came to that once, they that had most flesh upon their backs wished they had less, and 'twould have been better for them. Wax and brick. There was a question started once about wax and brick, why the one should be so brittle and liable to be broken with every knock, and the other bear up against all injuries and weathers so durable and firm. The wax philosophized upon the matter, and finding out at last that it was burning made the brick so hard, cast itself into the fire, upon an opinion that heat would harden the wax too, but that which consolidated the one dissolved the other. A fly upon a wheel. "What a dust do I raise," says the fly, "upon the coach wheel, and what a rate do I drive at," says the same fly again, "upon the horse's back." A husbandman and Ceres. A certain farmer complained that the beards of his corn cut the reaper's and the thrasher's fingers sometimes, and therefore he desired Ceres that his corn might grow hereafter without beards. The request was granted, and the little birds ate up all his grain. "Fool that I was," says he, "rather to lose the support of my life than venture the pricking of my servants' fingers." A countryman and a hawk. A country fellow had the fortune to take a hawk in the hot pursuit of a pigeon. The hawk pleaded for herself that she never did the countryman any harm. and therefore I hope," says she, "that you'll do me none." "Well," says the countryman, "and pray what wrong did the pigeon ever do you? Now by the reason of your own argument, you must expect to be treated yourself as you yourself would have treated this pigeon." A league of beasts and fishes. The beasts entered into a league with the fishes against the birds. The war was declared, but the fishes, instead of their quota, sent their excuse that they were not able to march by land. A mouse in a chest. A mouse that was bred in a chest, and had lived all her days upon what the dame of the house laid up in it, happened one time to drop out over the side, and to stumble upon a very delicious morsel, as she was hunting up and down to find her way in again. She had no sooner the taste of it in her mouth, but she brake out into exclamations. What a fool she had been thus long to persuade herself that there was no happiness in the world but in that box. The fishes and the frying pan. A cook was frying a dish of live fish, and so soon as ever they felt the heat of the pan. "There's no enduring of this," cried one, and so they all leapt into the fire, and instead of mending the matter, they were worse now than before. A countryman and a river. A countryman that was to pass a river sounded it up and down to try where it was most fordable, and upon trial he made this observation on it: "Where the water ran smooth, he found it deepest, and on the contrary, shallowest where it made most noise." A spaniel and a sow. "I wonder," says a sow to a spaniel, "how you can fawn thus upon a master that gives you so many blows and twinges by the ears." "Well," says the dog, "but then set the good bits and the good words he gives me against those blows and twinges, and I'm a gainer by the bargain." End of section 3. Read by Gila Labinger Freeberg. Napa, February 11th, 2024.
Section 4 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Jewish Story, The Story of Ashmedai, by Angelo S. Rappoport. King of the demons is Ashmedai or Asmodeus. The name of Ashmedai is never mentioned in the Talmud of Jerusalem, nor in older Palestinian sources. He is very cunning and malignant. Of immense strength and very powerful, he is intent upon doing harm to man. And yet he is frequently ready to perform deeds of kindness. Ashmedai foreknows the future, and by the use of the ineffable name he can be made serviceable unto man and compelled to do what is bidden by those who pronounce the ineffable name. Thus, by the power and in virtue of his signet ring, on which was engraven the ineffable name, King Solomon gained power over Ashmedai and made him do his bidding. The legend of King Solomon and Ashmedai runs as follows. King Solomon, the son of David, was about to build the temple of the Lord. And the house, when it was in building, was built of stone made ready before it was brought thither. Now, before the operation was begun, King Solomon consulted with the rabbis and asked him, "How shall I accomplish this without using tools of iron?" As no iron was to be used in the construction of the temple. And the rabbis remembered that an insect existed since the creation of the world, which possessed the power of cutting stones, for even the hardest substance could not resist the power of this insect. The rabbis therefore replied to the king, "There is an insect called Schwimmer, with which Moses once cut the precious stones of the ephod." Hearing these words, the king asked, "And where may this Schwimmer be found?" To which the rabbis made answer as follows: "Conjure up a male and a female demon and coerce them. Perchance they know where the Schwimmer is now to be found, and they will reveal the secret unto thee." And the king did as they had counseled him. He conjured up into his presence a male and a female demon, and when they refused to reveal unto him the whereabouts of the Schwimmer, he gave orders to torture them. But all this was in vain, for the male and the female demon both declared that, not knowing the whereabouts of the Schwimmer, they could not reveal the secret to King Solomon. "But perhaps," they continued, "Ashmedai, the king of the demons, knows the hiding place and will reveal the secret to the king." The king thereupon urged them to tell him where Ashmedai might be found. And the male and female demon answered as follows: "Ashmedai's residence is on a high mountain, where he has dug a deep pit which serves him as a cistern. This he has filled with water. Every morning before ascending to heaven, to study in the school of wisdom there, and to listen to the decrees of the upper assembly, he covers his cistern over with a stone and seals it with his own seal. Every day, when he returns from his celestial visit, he carefully examines the seal, and on finding that it has not been broken, he drinks, quenches his thirst, and finally covers it again with the stone, seals the stone with his own seal, and takes his departure." Thus spoke the male and female demon, and King Solomon decided to test the truth of their assertions. He thereupon sent his trusty servant Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and enjoined him to capture Ashmedai, the king of the demons. Benaiah armed himself with a magic chain and a ring upon which the ineffable name was engraved, and went out to execute the command of King Solomon. He also provided himself with skins of wine and a fleece of wool. When he arrived at the mountain where Ashmedai had his abode, Benaiah at once cunningly set to work. He first dug a pit below that of Ashmedai, and into it he drained off the water from the pit of the demon, and plugged the hole with the fleece he had brought. He then dug another pit higher up, and in it he made a channel through which he filled the empty pit of Ashmedai with the wine from the skins he had brought. He thereupon leveled the ground so as not to arouse the suspicion of the demon king, and withdrew to a tree nearby, where he waited for the return of Ashmedai and for an opportunity to seize him. And when he had waited a little while, he heard a noise in the air as of the beating of gigantic wings. Benaiah soon perceived Ashmedai, who was descending from heaven, whither he had gone to study in the school of wisdom and to listen to the decrees of the upper assembly. The demon king examined his seal, and seeing that it had not been tampered with, raised the stone. But lo! To his surprise he found the cistern filled with wine. Now Ashmedai, like all other demons, hates wine, and usually abstains from drinking it. He was therefore unwilling to drink from the cistern, muttering to himself that wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. At last, however, being thirsty, the demon king could not resist the temptation to drink and proceeded to quench his thirst. When he had drunk his fill, Ashmedai, demon king though he was, became intoxicated and lay down to sleep. Thereupon Benaiah quickly came forth from his hiding place and stealthily approached the sleeping demon. He took up the magic chain he had brought with him, and upon which was engraved the ineffable name of God, and fastened it round the neck of the sleeping demon. At last Ashmedai awoke from his sleep. He was mightily wroth and roared like a lion in his fury, when he saw himself bound and fettered. He seized the chain to break it, but Benaiah called out to him and warned him, "The name of the Lord is upon thee." Ashmedai, cowed and conquered, desisted. And thus Benaiah, the trusty servant of King Solomon, secured the king of the demons and made him prisoner. He thereupon proceeded on his return journey, leading the demon king with him. As they traveled along, they passed a palm tree, and Ashmedai rubbed himself against it, but by doing so uprooted the tree and threw it down. Walking a little farther, they drew near the hut of a poor widow. She came out and implored the demon not to rub himself against her hut, as he might uproot it. Ashmedai complied with the request of the poor woman, and as he was bending back rather quickly, he broke a bone in his body, whereupon he said, "This is that which is written, and a gentle answer breaketh the bone." Proceeding farther on their way, they saw a blind man straying out of his way, whereupon the demon king hailed him and directed him aright. When a little farther he descried a drunken man who was in a similar difficulty, he again showed him the road. A wedding party then passed along, rejoicing and making merry. But at the sight of the merrymakers, Ashmedai wept. And when a little farther on he heard a man ordering at a shoemaker's a pair of shoes that would last him 7 years, he burst out into a peal of uncontrollable laughter. He shrieked and jeered and muttered words of scorn when he saw a magician at his tricks. Benaiah wondered greatly, and asked the demon king to explain unto him the reason of his strange and almost incomprehensible conduct. "Why didst thou so promptly help the blind man, guiding him and putting him aright when he strayed?" asked Benaiah. And Ashmedai made answer, "Because I heard it proclaimed in heaven that this blind man was perfectly righteous, and would inherit the world to come, and that whosoever rendered him a service would also earn a claim to a place in the world of the future." "And why," queried Benaiah, "didst thou put right the man who, overcome with drink, was wandering out of his way?" "Because," replied Ashmedai, "I have heard it proclaimed in heaven that this man was wholly and entirely bad and wicked, and so I rendered him a good service, so that he might not lose all, but at least receive some good in the world that now is." "And why," continued Benaiah to question his prisoner, "why didst thou weep when thou didst see the rejoicing wedding party pass?" "The bridegroom of that wedding party," replied Ashmedai, "is destined to die within 30 days, and his newly wedded wife will soon be a widow, and will needs wait 13 years for her husband's brother, who is now only an infant. And why didst thou laugh when thou didst hear the man ordering a pair of shoes that should last him 7 years? Again queried Benaiah. Because, Ashmedai replied, the man was not sure of even living 7 days. And why thy jeers and scorn when thou sawest the magician at his works? Because, was the answer of the demon king, at that very moment the magician was sitting upon a vast treasure hidden in the soil underneath him, and yet he knew it not, although he pretended that he could foretell the future and unravel mysteries. And when the demon king was brought into the royal city, he was kept 3 days before being led into the presence of the king of Israel. Why am I not being led into the presence of the king? He queried. And the answer was that the king had drunk too much wine and could not receive him, as the wine had overpowered him. Thereupon Ashmedai took up a brick and placed it upon the top of another brick. When this action of the demon was in due course communicated to the king of Israel, the latter said, by this action Ashmedai meant, if the wine has overpowered him, go and make him drunk again. On the following day, the demon king once more asked, and why am I not being led today into the presence of the king? And the answer was that the king had eaten too much and was resting. Thereupon the demon went and removed the brick he had placed on the top of the other. And when in due course this action of the demon was again reported to the king, he replied, by this action Ashmedai meant, if he has eaten too much, let him keep diet, be stinted in his food for a day. At last, on the 3rd day, the demon king was introduced to the king of Israel. Ashmedai then measured off 4 cubits upon the floor with a stick, and thus he spoke to King Solomon. When thou diest, thou wilt rest in thy grave, and possess in this world not more than 4 cubits of earth. But now, although thou hast conquered the world, thou art not yet content, and must needs overcome me, too, and make me prisoner. To which the king of Israel made reply, I have made thee prisoner because I wish to build the temple, and as I am not allowed to use iron tools, I must have the shamir by virtue of which I can have the stones split. I have made thee prisoner so that thou mayest reveal to me the place where the shamir is to be found. Thus spake the king. I do not have the shamir in my possession, for it has not been committed to my charge. Know then, O king, that the shamir was committed to the charge of the Prince of the Sea, who entrusted it to the moorcock, and the moorcock has promised upon oath that he would return it again to the Prince of the Sea. Thus spoke Ashmedai, and the king of Israel, marveling greatly, asked, and what does the moorcock do with the shamir? The moorcock, replied the demon, carries the shamir to some bleak rocky mountain, which he cleaves asunder by means of the shamir, to which, as thou well knowest, no substance, however hard, can resist. And into the cleft thus formed the moorcock carries verdant grass, herbs and seeds of various plants and trees. Thus when the valley is clothed with grass and green, it becomes a place fit for habitation. Thereupon King Solomon sent out his servants to search for the nest of the moorcock. At last Benaiah found the nest, and saw that it contained a young brood. Covering the nest with a glass globe, he awaited the return of the moorcock. When the bird came and saw its young, but was unable to get at them, the nest being impenetrably covered with the glass globe, he went and fetched the shamir so as to apply it to the glass and break it. At the very moment when the moorcock was about to apply the shamir to the glass in order to cut it, Benaiah gave a shout, and the moorcock was so frightened that in his agitation he dropped the shamir. Snatching it up, Benaiah went off with it. The moorcock, however, finding that he was now unable to keep his oath, according to which he was bound to return the shamir to the Prince of the Sea, went and strangled himself. And now Ashmedai remained in the power of Solomon, who detained him until the building of the temple was completed. Once, however, Ashmedai got the better of Solomon. One day, when Ashmedai was alone in the presence of the king, the latter said, "Thou seest now that the demons are but little superior to men, and have no power over them, for I have conquered thee and made thee prisoner." To this Ashmedai replied, "If thou wilt take this chain from my neck, and give me for a while thy signet ring, I will show thee my superiority." Foolishly, Solomon decided to put Ashmedai to the test, took off the chain from his neck, and handed him the signet ring. But no sooner had he done this when he had cause to regret his rash action. Snatching him up, Ashmedai swallowed the king. Then he stretched out his wings so that one touched heaven and the other the earth, and vomited out the king of Israel in a distant land 400 miles away. Ashmedai then gave himself out as King Solomon and took his place, whilst the king himself was far away in a strange country and obliged to beg his bread from door to door. Thus Solomon wandered for many years, until he came back to Jerusalem. He went to the house of the Sanhedrin and said, "I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem." But the members of the Sanhedrin thought that he was mad and would not believe him. When, however, he came every day repeating the same thing, they began to reason and to ask themselves what he really meant by his words. They accordingly sent for Benaiah, King Solomon's trusted servant, and asked him, "Does the king ask thee now into his presence?" To which Benaiah replied that he had not been asked into the king's presence for some time. The members of the Sanhedrin thereupon made inquiries whether he who, according to the stranger, had taken the king's place, ever visited the royal harem. And when the ladies of the harem replied that he did visit the harem, the members of the Sanhedrin sent instructions that they should watch his feet, and see whether his feet were like those of a cock. But the answer came back that the king visited his harem in stockinged feet and wearing slippers. Thereupon the rabbis felt sure that the stranger had spoken the truth, and that Ashmedai had taken the place of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. They escorted the king to the palace, and here restored unto him the chain and the ring on both of which the name of God was engraven. Then Solomon straightway advanced into the presence chamber, where Ashmedai, arrayed in Solomon's royal garments, was sitting on the throne. No sooner did he see Solomon enter than he took fright, and uttering a terrible shriek, he raised his wings and flew away into space. End of section 4.
Section 5 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Arabic Story. Ibrahim and Nimrod by Joseph Meyouhas. Ibrahim grew and was 10 years old, and began to call the sons of man to worship the God of truth, and to relinquish idols of falsehood. And Nimrod was amongst them. Nimrod heard and was very wroth, and he sent messengers to seize Ibrahim, and he gave an order to cast him into a fiery furnace, which he made ready for him, to burn him to death. Now none could approach the furnace because of its great heat, and Iblis hastened to aid Nimrod, and he saw that they must prepare a long pitchfork, that is a tool with which the child might be cast into the flames from afar. And Nimrod prepared the implement, and he cast Ibrahim, fettered with chains, into the fire. But Allah, with his manifold mercies, saved Ibrahim, his little servant, from the flames, for he immediately sent his angel Matariel, who changed the furnace to a garden full of flowers and lilies bedewed with the dew of heaven, and full of the aroma of frankincense. And Ibrahim wandered amongst them, and enjoyed their beauty and scent. And the thing became known to Nimrod, and his wrath against the God of Ibrahim was great, and he swore to make war against him and destroy him. But he knew not the place of his dwelling, and he questioned Ibrahim about him. And Ibrahim said to him, "The heavens are his seat." So Nimrod hastened and ordered to be erected for him a high tower of 7 stories, each story to be 70 cubits high, in order to ascend to the heavens to war against Allah. And when the work of the tower was nigh to its end, Allah confused the tongues of the builders, and each spoke in another tongue, up to 73 tongues, and each ceased to understand his brother, and they could not finish the building as they had planned. And Nimrod called the name of the place Babel, for there the tongues of the builders had become confounded. Now it was clear to Nimrod that his design had failed, so he schemed, and he made a tower floating in the air, to mount in it unto Allah in the heavens. And this is the story of the tower. Nimrod took a large wooden box, and in the top of it was an opening, and he bound to it 4 trained eagles, great and strong, 1 eagle to each corner of the box, and he fixed the trunk of a high tree in the box from within. And at the top of the tree trunk he hung a fine piece of fat meat. And upon the benches, which he made to the box on each side, he himself sat with his armor-bearer. Now the eagles saw the piece of fat flesh which was above their heads at the top of the tree trunk, and they strove to reach it to eat it, but could not, for they were bound to the sides of the box. But in their striving to ascend they raised the box and all that was therein, higher and higher, to a very great height, so that the eye of man could not perceive it. Then Nimrod said to his armor-bearer, "We have reached the heavens. Take the arrows which I shall place in thy hands, and dip the points in blood, and cast them into the heart of the God of Ibrahim, who hath chosen his dwelling place in these heights, and fell him to the earth dead." And the man did as his Lord commanded, and when the arrows in the quiver were ended, Nimrod ordered his armor-bearer to lower the lump of flesh which was at the top of the tree trunk. And he tied it to the bottom end of the tree trunk, And the eagles lowered their heads towards the meat, and the box went down with them slowly until they reached the earth. Then Nimrod, with pride and arrogance, showed all who stood before him the arrows steeped in blood which had fallen to the earth when he had cast them. And he said, "I have slain the God of Ibrahim my foe, who rescued him from the fiery furnace, and have revenged myself upon him." And the men were seduced by his words, and had faith in him again, and all cried out and said, "Indeed, there is no hero like Nimrod in the land, and there is no God besides him." But the might and power of Nimrod was not to endure long, for Allah in his fierce wrath proved to all that his might was naught, and his strength vanity. And Allah sent a small fly of the swamps which entered the brain of Nimrod through his nostrils. And he commanded it, saying, "Prick and prick the brain of Nimrod with thy sting, and leave him not a moment's peace." And the fly did as Allah commanded, and troubled the rest of Nimrod day and night for 200 years, and Nimrod was exceedingly harassed, and he wandered to and fro as a madman, and his wise men counseled him to hire a special blacksmith. And the blacksmith beat with his hammer upon the anvil mighty strokes, in order to affright the fly, that it might cease to trouble Nimrod with its pricking. But in vain, for the fly was soon accustomed to the blows of the hammer, and returned to prick him, as Allah had commanded it. Now when the sons of man saw all that befell Nimrod, they were exceedingly afraid, and said, "There is indeed no God like the Allah of Ibrahim." And they believed in him, and the wrath of Nimrod grew against Ibrahim, and he ordered that he be driven forth from the land of his birth. But when Ibrahim had departed from the city, Nimrod repented of what he had done in driving him forth, and sent soldiers to bring him back. But when Ibrahim looked behind him, and perceived his pursuers from afar, he knew them, and said, "Ah, danger approaches. These are the men of Nimrod, who have been sent after me to slay me, for they ride on the mules which hauled the wood to heat the furnace to burn me in it, and in a little while they will surely seize me. What shall I do with this weak and wretched ass beneath me?" He hastened and leapt from the back of the ass, and ran on foot amongst the mountains to hide himself in one of the caves. As he ran, he met a flock of goats. He bade them shelter and conceal him from his enemies, but they would not. And he ran on, and met a flock of sheep, and also bade them be a shelter to him, and the sheep at once granted his request, saying, "Lay thyself upon thy belly on the ground." And Ibrahim did so, and all hastened and encircled him, and hid him from the view of his pursuers, who passed by without noticing him. And Allah rewarded the sheep for the good which they had done to Ibrahim, his faithful servant, and he gave them broad and fat tails, and none are like them in breadth and fatness amongst all the sheep on earth, except in the land of the east. And he said to the goats, "Ye shall be short-tailed all the days of your lives, and your tails shall not even be of use to drive away the flies from upon you." And to the mules he said, "Because ye hauled the trees to heat the furnace to burn Ibrahim in it, and also pursued him to seize and deliver him into the hands of his enemies, ye shall be barren henceforth, and only burdens and travail shall be your lot all your days." End of section 5. Read by Gila Labinger Freeberg. Napa, February 11th, 2024.
Section 6 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Eli Quill. An Arabic story. The Seller of Words by Habeeb Ibrahim Katibah. A certain king often became bored with the cares and labors of government, and yearned for a change. And when his ears grew tired of hearing the long reports of his counselors, and his hand weary of pressing the signet ring in the purple wax of royal decrees, he would slip out, as soon as chance offered, with his Grand Vizier. The two, disguised as merchants, would then stroll through the streets of the city, ready for any adventure which might befall them. Now, once upon a time, as they were thus wandering through a distant quarter of the city, they came to a small square, and there they spied an old dervish squatting on the ground before a pair of scales. Yet he was weighing nothing on his scale, for it was plain that he had nothing to weigh, and this strange sight so excited the curiosity of the king that he said to the dervish, "Tell me, worthy and saintly dervish, what is it you sell? For though I see you adjusting your scales, you seem to have no goods to put in them." The old dervish smiled. "I have something to sell more valuable than all the riches to be found in the shops of the jewelers or in the bazaars of the silk or spice merchants," he answered. "I am a seller of words." Then the king smiled at his vizier and winked, as much to say, "Let us humor the old fellow." And turning again to the dervish, he asked, "And pray, how do you sell your words?" "Cheap enough," answered the holy man. "I ask but 5 dirhams a phrase." With that, he placed a small weight in one of the balances of his scales and held out his hand. So the king slipped 5 dirhams into his hand, and the old dervish, as though he were weighing out a phrase, looked up and said, "Do not begin an act." And there he stopped. "Is that all?" cried the king in amazement. "That is all for 5 dirhams," replied the dervish roguishly. "I have weighed you exactly what you are entitled to have." Then the king saw that the old man knew what he was about. "In for a dirham, in for a dinner," he said to his vizier, and slipping another 5 dirhams into the dervish's hand, begged him to weigh out the rest of the sentence. And the dervish went on from where he had left off. "Whose end you cannot foresee." Then the king, who was tickled by the old dervish's shrewdness, thanked him solemnly and passed on with his vizier, smiling to think he had paid 10 dirhams to learn the saying, "Do not begin an act whose end you cannot foresee." But as he kept on thinking about the simple words, they seemed to gain in meaning and importance, and by the time he got back to the palace, he was so impressed by them that he called for skilled artists and had the dervish's saying woven in golden letters into beautiful arabesque designs which covered his palace walls. So that the eye could not fail to mark the words, he had the designs repeated in every room. Then, one day, the king became afflicted with a tumor which grew so large and gave him so much pain that he decided to have it lanced. The royal surgeon was sent for, and he came to the palace with the old lancet which he had inherited from his father before him. It was a plain-looking instrument, with a simple horn handle, but its blade was keen and bright, and the old surgeon was used to it. But when he was about to be led into the king's presence, he was stopped by the Grand Vizier, who was secretly in league with plotters against the king. He led him aside and said, "Let me see the lancet with which you are going to open the king's tumor." And the surgeon drew out the homely old lancet and showed it to the Grand Vizier. Then the latter, with a great show of indignation, cried, "O barber without a conscience! O surgeon void of all reverence for Allah's chosen! Are you not ashamed to bear so cheap and homely a lancet before the eyes of the august king? Put it away, and do not dare show it. Here is a lancet more fit to apply the healing wound to the king's tumor. Here is a lancet which need not bring a blush to the king's cheeks, while yours looks as though it had been used for centuries on the ignoble swellings of the lowliest camel drivers." And with that, the Grand Vizier handed the astonished surgeon a flashing lancet with a handle of mother of pearl set with jewels, and sent him into the presence of the king. As soon as he had made his salam, the surgeon set about his preparations. But while waiting for the basin he had asked to be brought, so that the blood which flowed would not spurt over the costly rugs which covered the floor, his eye happened to fall on the saying which ran along the wall, "Do not begin an act whose end you cannot foresee." And the word end made him think of his lancet, for it was with its end that he would have to open the king's tumor. And it occurred to the honest surgeon that he did not know the end of this new bejeweled lancet, which had been thrust upon him, and therefore could not foresee what the result of his using it would be. So he said to himself, I do not know the end of this thing, but I do know the end of my father's trusty blade, which never yet had failed me. And after a moment's hesitation, he laid down the lancet which the Grand Vizier had given him, and drew from his girdle his proved and reliable old knife. Now the king had been watching the surgeon. He had noticed his hesitation, and seeing him change from one lancet to another, asked him why and wherefore. So the surgeon told him what had happened to him before he had entered his presence, and the king shuddered, for he knew that the shadow of death had been resting above his head. For long he had suspected his Grand Vizier, and now he knew that the handsome new lancet, with its handle of mother of pearl and jewels, was to have been used to poison him. Its end had been dipped in a colorless poison, which left no hint of its presence. But the king felt he must be just and not condemn his Grand Vizier unheard. So he sent for him and said, O most loyal and worthy Vizier, before the surgeon opens my tumor, let him bleed you, for you are too full-blooded, and it will benefit you, with the handsome new lancet your affection for me has led you to bestow on him. And when the Grand Vizier turned pale and declared that he was in the best of health, and a bleeding was the very last thing he needed, the king knew that he was indeed guilty. Then the king clapped his hands, and the gigantic backs of his guards rushed in and forced the Grand Vizier to kneel while the surgeon bled him, and that was the end of the Grand Vizier. And then, as soon as his tumor had been opened and his pain relieved, the king's messengers ran swiftly through the streets of the city, while all made way for them, to find the old dervish. And they found the seller of words squatting before his scales in the grass-grown square of the distant quarter, where the king first had met him. Then they cast a rich robe of honor over his shoulders, placed a jeweled turban on his head, and, hoisting him on a white Arabian steed from the royal stables, led him back to the palace, to become Grand Vizier in the place of the faithless one who so unwisely began an act whose end he could not foresee. End of Section 6.
Section 7 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Albanian Story, The Devil's Duped, by Paul Fenimore Cooper. A father sent his son to the devils to learn devilry. At the end of a year, he had learned so much that he surpassed the devils. So the father came for him and took him home. The boy said to his father, Now that I have learned devilry so well, tomorrow I wish to turn into a very fine horse, so fine that you will see fit to sell me for a price becoming my value. But know, above all things, that you must not give my halter away with me. The next morning he turned into a horse. His father took him and sold him for many thousand piastres, and kept the halter. Straightway the horse ran away from his master and came back home to his father. The following day he turned into a mule. His father took him to the market to sell him. The devils who had taught him came and asked the father, For how much will you sell the mule? I'll sell him for so much, said the father, naming a price. They agreed to the price and paid him. Then the father said, I will not give you the halter. They said, It's necessary for us to have it. And they began to argue. Meanwhile the mule escaped and went off, and the devils hurried to follow him. When they came near the mule, and he saw he could not escape them, he turned into a hare. The devils turned into dogs and ran after him. Again they caught up with him, but the hare turned into an apple and fell into the lap of a queen. The devils turned into 2 dervishes and said, In the name of the Lord, give us that apple that has fallen into your lap, because for many days we have struggled for it. The queen said, "Shouldn't I be ashamed to refuse after you have struggled so for this apple? Here it is. Take it and go about your own business." And she threw them the apple. The apple turned into millet and scattered on the ground. The dervishes turned into chickens and started eating the millet. Then the millet turned into a fox and ate the chickens. Thus the pupil had learned so much devilry that he ate up those who had taught him. End of section 7. Read by Gila Labinger Freeberg. Napa, February 13th, 2024. Section 8 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Hungarian Story. The Judge and the King by Rosika Schwimmer. King Matthias, the Righteous, was once again in a mood that often took hold of him. The mood to step down from the chilly heights of the throne and to mingle on a level plain with the people. This time he walked the streets of his beloved Kosovar, every nook and corner of which is to this day filled with the memory of Hungary's greatest king. Clad in shabby garments, Matthias wandered around in the city, watching the life of the peasants who brought milk and eggs and fruit and vegetables and flowers and many other things to the market. Matthias was a keen observer and took mental notes of many things that occurred to him as worthwhile to remember. He would stop occasionally to exchange greetings with poor people who did not guess what an exalted personage it was that shook hands with them and inquired about their lives at home. As he walked through the streets and over the market, Matthias felt tired and hungry. So he sat down at a little open market hut where the peasants buy cups of coffee and warm their hands on them before they warm the insides of their stomachs with the hot liquid. Matthias ordered a cup of coffee, and as he sipped it he kept his eye on the scene in front of him. Opposite to the hut was the judge's house. The judge had the reputation of abusing poor people. He made them work for his private use and never paid for their labor. This morning the judge was just about to have wood carried into his yard. To save paying for the job, he ordered the pandors to bring poor people from the market to carry the wood into his house. One of the pandors saw Matthias idly sipping his coffee. He stepped up to him and said, "Hey, you long-nosed fellow, get busy. Come and carry wood for the judge." "What are you paying?" asked the king. "That," said the pandor, and struck Matthias hard with his stick. Then he drove him with the others to the judge's house. The judge was leaning on his elbows on the window-sill, with a long-stemmed pipe dangling from his mouth as he watched the pandor drive the poor people to his house. When Matthias came near the window where the judge looked out, he asked, "What do you pay me if I am carrying wood for you?" "Exactly what I am paying the others," said the judge. When he saw that Matthias was about to say something, he added, "You'd better stop talking and hurry along with the others, or you get extra pay, some blue streaks on your back." Matthias did not say a word and went to carry wood with the rest of the poor people. He carried the logs from the street into the yard. Secretly, he wrote his name on 3 logs at the bottom of the pile. The same day he left Kosovar. But 3 days later he returned to his beloved city. This time it was not a shabby citizen, but his royal majesty who came for a visit. He came in all his splendor, with a great retinue, everyone clad in the pomp of court garments. Matthias received deputations and individuals, and finally asked for the judge and the town council. The judge appeared, all humble servitude and smirking respect. "How is the city?" Matthias asked. "Oh, it is as thriving and prosperous as one can wish," the judge said. "And have the poor people any complaints?" asked Matthias. "Oh, none whatsoever," said the judge. "Under your majesty's gracious reign, everyone is happy and nobody has any complaints." "Is that so?" said Matthias with an ominous tinge to his voice. "Have the poor people no complaints?" he repeated. "None whatsoever, I assure your gracious majesty," answered the judge again. "Well," said Matthias to his servants, "go to the house of the judge and search the pile of wood for 3 logs bearing my name. Bring those logs and bring also the judge's pandors along." The king's servants went to the house of the judge. They searched the wood piles for the logs with the king's signature. As soon as they found the marked logs, they returned to the king, bringing the judge's pandors with him. When they arrived, Matthias thundered at the judge, "Who carried this wood for you?" "The poor people of the city," stammered the judge, pale and trembling. "And what did you pay for the hauling?" Nothing," answered the judge. "Nothing?" said the king, lifting his voice so that it could be heard beyond the walls of his palace. "Nothing? You paid worse than nothing. You paid by striking those who resented your infernal meanness." "Hey, you there," the king said, picking out among them the judge's pandors, the one who had struck him. "Hey, do you remember my long nose? My back is still smarting from the blow you struck, you scoundrel." "And you, my good judge, who find everything so pleasant for the poor people, who think they have nothing to complain of, do you remember your answer to me?" The judge did not reply. He could not. His teeth chattered, his knees trembled, and everything was black before his eyes. "You don't seem to remember. Short memory. Very short memory," said the king with biting irony. "Well, I will refresh your memory. I will," said the king. Then he turned to his retinue and to the others who filled the hall and related how it all happened. "Look at that trembling coward," he said, pointing to the judge. "When I asked how much he would pay me if I carried wood for him, he said, 'As much as the others.' And when I was about to ask another question, he stopped me, threatening, 'You'd better stop talking and hurry along with the others or you get extra pay. Some blue streaks on your back.' Do you remember your answer now?" The judge stammered an inaudible, "Yes." "This man is not fit to hold office," said the king. "He must never be placed in a position of power. He has misused the power vested in him. Instead of serving the people, he made them serve him. He must never hold office again." Then the king turned to the pandors and said, "And you, poor fools, learn to be men even if you are servants. If you are ordered to do an injustice, resent it. Don't sell your souls. Don't harass poor people because a hard and cruel man wishes to make you the tool of his wickedness." The people of Kosovar soon learned of the king's speech. And when Matthias left the city to return to his residence in Buda, the streets were lined with poor people who shouted themselves hoarse, "Elgin, Matthias! Elgin! Long live Matthias! Long may he live!" Few kings were ever cheered as sincerely as was Matthias on this occasion. End of section 8. Read by Gila Labinger Freeberg, Napa, February 13th, 2024.
Section 9 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Hungarian Story. The Gold Bread by Edouard R.L. Laboulaye. Once upon a time, a widow with her beautiful daughter lived on the edge of a tiny village. The mother was modest and humble. The daughter, Marienka, was pride itself. She had suitors from all sides, but none satisfied her. The more they tried to please her, the more she disdained them. One night, when the poor mother could not sleep, she began to pray for her dear child, who gave her more than one care. Marienka was asleep by her side. As the mother gazed lovingly at her beautiful daughter, Marienka laughed in her sleep. "What a beautiful dream she must have to laugh in this way," said the mother. Then she finished her prayer, laid her head on her pillow, and fell asleep. "My dear child," said she in the morning, "what did you dream last night that you laughed so?" "What did I dream, Mamma? I dreamed that a nobleman came here for me in a copper coach, and that he put a ring on my finger set with a stone that sparkled like the stars. And when I entered the church, the people paused in their worship and had eyes for no one but me." My daughter, that was a proud dream," said the mother, shaking her head. But Marienka went out singing. The same day, a wagon entered the yard. A handsome young farmer in good circumstances came to ask Marienka to share a peasant's bread with him. The mother was pleased with the suitor, but the proud Marienka refused him, saying, "Though you should come in a copper coach, and put a ring on my finger set with a stone that sparkled like the stars, I would not have you for a husband." And the farmer went away, storming at Marienka's pride. The next night the mother waked and prayed still more earnestly for her daughter, when behold, Marienka laughed again as she was sleeping. "I wonder what she is dreaming," said the mother, who prayed, unable to sleep. "My dear child," she said the next morning, "what did you dream last night that you laughed aloud?" "What did I dream, Mamma? I dreamed that a nobleman came here for me in a silver coach, and that he offered me a golden diadem. And when I entered the church, the people stopped their worship and looked only at me." "Hush, you are blaspheming. Pray, my daughter, pray that you may not fall into temptation." But Marienka ran away to escape her mother's sermon. The same day, a carriage entered the yard. A young lord came to entreat Marienka to share a nobleman's bread with him. "It is a great honor," said the mother, "but vanity is blind." "Though you should come in a silver coach," said Marienka to the new suitor, "and should offer me a golden diadem, I would not have you for a husband." "Take care, my child," said the poor mother. "Pride is a device of the evil one. Consider what you are saying." Mothers never know what they are saying, thought Maryanka, and she went out, shrugging her shoulders. The third night the mother could not sleep for anxiety. As she lay awake praying for her daughter, behold, Maryanka burst into a loud fit of laughter. "Oh," said the mother, "what can the unhappy child be dreaming now?" And she continued to pray till daylight. "My dear child," said she in the morning, "what did you dream last night?" "You will be angry again if I tell you," answered Maryanka. "No, no," replied the mother. "Tell me." "I dreamed that a noble lord with a great train of attendants came to ask me in marriage. He was in a golden coach, and he brought me a dress of gold lace, and when I entered the church, the people looked at nobody but me." The mother clasped her hands. Maryanka, half-dressed, sprang from the bed and ran into the next room to avoid a lecture that was tiresome to her. The same day 3 coaches entered the yard, one of copper, one of silver, and one of gold. The first drawn by 2 horses, the second by 4, and the third by 8, all caparisoned with gold and pearls. From the copper and silver coaches alighted pages dressed in scarlet breeches and green jackets and cloaks, while from the golden coach stepped a handsome nobleman, all dressed in gold. He entered the house and, bending one knee on the ground, asked the mother for her daughter's hand. "What an honor!" thought the mother. "My dream has come to pass," said Maryanka. "You see, mother, that as usual I was right and you were wrong." She ran to her chamber, tied the betrothal knot, and offered it smilingly as a pledge of her faith to the handsome lord, who on his side put a ring on her finger set with a stone that sparkled like the stars, and presented her with a golden diadem and a dress of gold lace. The proud girl ran to her room to dress for the ceremony, while the mother, still anxious, said to the bridegroom, "My good sir, what bread do you offer my daughter?" "Among us," said he, "the bread is of copper, silver, and gold. She can take her choice." "What does this mean?" thought the mother. But Maryanka had no anxiety. She returned as beautiful as the sun, took her lover's arm, and set out for the church without asking her mother's blessing. The poor woman was left to pray alone on the threshold. And when Maryanka returned and entered the carriage, she did not even turn round to look at her mother or to bid her a last farewell. The 8 horses set off at a gallop, and did not stop till they reached a huge rock, in which there was a hole as large as the gate of a city. The horses plunged into the darkness, the earth trembled, and the rock cracked and crumbled. Maryanka seized her husband's hand. "Don't be alarmed, my fair one. In a moment it will be light." All at once 1,000 lights waved in the air. The dwarfs of the mountain, each with a torch in his hand, came to salute their lord, the king of the mines. Maryanka learned for the first time her husband's name. Whether he was a spirit of good or of evil, she thought. At least he was so rich that she did not regret her choice. They emerged from the darkness and advanced through bleached forest and mountains that raised their pale and gloomy summits to the skies. Firs, beeches, birches, oaks, rocks, all were of lead. At the end of the forest stretched a vast meadow, the grass of which was of silver, and at the bottom of the meadow was a castle of gold, inlaid with diamonds and rubies. The carriage stopped before the door, and the king of the mines offered his hand to his bride, saying, "My fair one, all that you see in this country is yours." Maryanka was delighted. But it is impossible to make so long a journey without being hungry. And it was with pleasure, therefore, that she saw the mountain dwarfs bring in a table, everything on which glittered with gold, silver, and precious stones. The dishes were marvelous, side dishes of emeralds, and roasts of gold on silver salvers. Everyone ate heartily except the bride, who begged her husband for a little bread. "Bring the copper bread," said the king of the mines. Maryanka could not eat it. "Bring the silver bread," said he. Maryanka could not eat it. "Bring the gold bread," said he at length. Maryanka could not eat it. "My fair one," said the king of the mines, "I am very sorry, but what can I offer you? We have no other bread." The bride burst into tears. Her husband laughed aloud. His heart was of metal, like his kingdom. "Weep if you like," he cried. "It will do you no good. What you wished for, you possess. Eat the bread that you have chosen." It was thus that the rich Maryanka lived in her castle, starving, always hungry, and seeking in vain for roots to allay the torture that was consuming her. God had humbled her by granting her prayer. 3 days in the year, the rogation days, when the people pray for the fruitful rain sent by the Lord, Maryanka returns to the earth. Dressed in rags, pale and wrinkled, she begs from door to door, too happy when anyone throws her a few crusts. And when she receives as alms from the poor what she lacks in her palace of gold, a little bread and a little pity. Some day she may win pardon and come back to live her life like the other peasants who work for the bread they eat. End of section number 9.
Section 10 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Polish Story, 1 Eye, 2 Eyes, and 3 Eyes, by Logan Marshall. There was once a father and a mother who had just one little daughter. But before the daughter grew up, her mother died, so the girl was sent to visit her aunt. Now the aunt wanted to marry the little girl's father, and persuaded her to make her father propose marriage. She promised to treat the little girl kindly and give her good meals and love her like her own daughter. So it came about that her father married the aunt, and they all went to live together. Some time after this, the aunt had 4 little girls. One of them had 1 eye, the second 2 eyes, the third 3 eyes, and the fourth 4 eyes. Now instead of enjoying all the comforts that her stepmother had promised her, the poor little stepdaughter had to take the cows out to pasture, and was given mud dumplings and peppered cheese to take with her for lunch. And yet, strange to say, she did not get sick, but had rosier cheeks than her stepsisters. Time passed, and the stepdaughters grew up, but still the stepmother wanted very much to find out why her stepdaughter remained so beautiful. To try to find out, she sent her daughter with 1 eye to the pasture with the stepdaughter to watch and see if anything happened that would explain why the stepdaughter was so pretty and rosy. When they got to the pasture, the 1-eyed girl said, "Sit down, sister, and comb my hair." So the stepdaughter did so, but as she was combing, she whispered, "Go to sleep, 1-eye," and the little girl went to sleep. Then the dappled cow came and gave her something to drink out of 1 horn and something to eat out of the other horn. In the evening they came home again, and the stepmother asked her daughter, "What have you seen?" But the girl had not seen anything. Next day the 2-eyed girl went with her and said, "Sit down, sister, and comb my hair." And as she did so, the stepdaughter whispered, "Go to sleep, 1-eye. Go to sleep with both eyes." And again the dappled cow came and gave her something to eat and drink. So when the evening came, the stepdaughter said, "Get up, sister, we shall have to go home." And when the stepmother asked the girl what she had seen, the girl did not know anything more than the first one did. The next morning the 3rd sister with 3 eyes went out to the pasture with her, and when they got there she said, "Sit down, sister, and comb my hair." Then the stepdaughter whispered, "Go to sleep, 1-eye, go to sleep, 2 eyes, go to sleep all 3. And again the dappled cow came and gave her food and drink. In the evening the stepdaughter said, "Get up, we have to go home." And when the stepmother asked her daughter, "What have you seen?" she did not know either. The 4th day the daughter with 4 eyes drove the cows out to pasture with her stepsister, and when they got to the pasture she said, "Sit down, sister, and comb my hair." So the stepsister did so and whispered, "Go to sleep, 1-eye, go to sleep, 2 eyes, go to sleep, 3 eyes." But she forgot the 4th eye. Again the dappled cow came and gave her a drink out of 1 horn and something to eat out of the other. But the girl's 4th eye saw everything while the other 3 were asleep, and in the evening when the stepmother asked her daughter what she had seen, the girl said, "Stepsister put 3 of my eyes to sleep, but the other eye saw the dappled cow come and give her something to eat out of 1 horn and something to drink out of the other." At this the stepmother was angry, and began to fatten up the dappled cow to slaughter it. The stepdaughter had to stay at home and eat her mud dumplings and peppered cheese, but every day she visited the cow and cried over it. One day the cow said, "This is the day when I am to be slaughtered, but ask your stepmother to give you my udder, and in it you will find a little stone. Bury it in the ground under the window, and from it will grow a linden tree, all made of glass, and under it a little dog will bark." The girl did as the cow had ordered her, and from the little stone grew a linden tree, under which a dog barked. And under the linden tree there was a spring, and the girl had to wash clothes in the spring until her hands bled. Now it happened that once a noble gentleman rode by, and when he saw the girl he wanted to marry her, although she was poor. But the stepmother would not allow it. A week later the gentleman came again and sued for her. Then the stepmother gave in, but she ordered her daughter to take a chain and wind it around the linden tree. The stepdaughter dressed herself up as well as she could, got in the carriage, and drove away with the gentleman. But the linden tree tore itself out of the ground and flew to the carriage, and the little dog followed behind barking. In about a year the young wife had a son, and when the stepmother heard it, she came to visit her. She just asked this question, "Daughter, are you sick or well?" and as she went away said that she would come again in the morning. The next day she brought her daughter with 2 eyes and asked again, "Daughter, are you sick or well?" So her stepdaughter answered, "Yes, I'm all right." "Look out of the window," said the stepmother, "and see how the fishes are playing in the pond." The young wife did so, and in that moment the stepmother threw her into the pond, so that the poor girl drowned. But her soul turned into a duck, which swam about sadly on the pond. Then the stepmother laid her own daughter in the bed and went home. When the young master, however, came home and saw what he thought was his wife, he asked her, "Why are you so ugly? Are you sick?" "Yes, very sick," she replied, and so the man took pity on her. Now that night, about 12 o'clock, a duck came flying in at the window, changed again into the young wife, and weeping all the while, bathed her little son. And when she had wrapped him up again, she lamented, "My linden rustles no more, the little dog has ceased to bark, and my son is crying, crying. 2 nights more I will come, and then no more." So saying, she flew out to the pond again in the form of a duck. The second night the duck came flying in at the window again, took on human form, prepared the bath, and bathed the little boy. And when she had wrapped him up again, she kissed him and complained, "My linden does not rustle, the little dog has ceased to bark, and my son cries bitterly. 1 more night I will come, and then never more." So saying, she flew out to the pond again in the form of a duck. But her husband stood behind the curtain, and cried when he saw her and heard these words. The third night she came again, and bathed the little son, and when she had finished, lamented, "My linden rustles not, my little dog has ceased to bark, and my son cries always. Now I shall come no more." Then the young man jumped out from his hiding place behind the curtain, and caught her before she had changed into a duck. But the young wife begged pitifully, "Let me go, my love, while time is favorable." "I will never let you go," cried the man, and his young wife said, "Well, finish the task then, if you can. I have a girdle around my body, and if you can cut it in 2 at 1 stroke, then I can stay with you. Otherwise, it will be still worse with me." The husband took his dagger and cut the girdle in 2, and there his young wife stood again before him as beautiful and rosy as ever, and told him what the stepmother had done to her. Next morning the stepmother was tied to the tail of a horse, and the horse was turned loose and chased over rough stony country. That was the last of the stepmother, but the linden rustled again, the dog barked, and the little boy smiled. End of section 10.
Section 11 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Polish Story, Krencipal and Krencipalka, by Elsie Bird. Krencipal and Krencipalka had not a penny to bless themselves with. Their cottage was tumbling to pieces. There was not a bit of bread in the cupboard. A bad state of things that was, to be sure. "Let us go out in the world and seek our fortune," said Krencipal to Krencipalka. So off they started. And they walked, and walked, till they met a needle. "Where are you off to?" asked the needle. "Into the world to seek our fortune," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. And the needle said, "Take me with you all the way. I will help you night and day." "But how are we going to carry you?" said Krencipal and Krencipalka. "Just stick me in your hat," answered the needle, and they did so. And they walked, till they met a lobster. "Where are you off to?" asked the lobster. "Into the world to seek our fortune," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. And the lobster said, "Take me with you all the way. I will help you night and day." "But how are we going to carry you?" asked Krencipal and Krencipalka. "Just put me in your basket," answered the lobster. And they did so. And they walked and walked till they met a duck. "Where are you off to?" asked the duck. "Into the world to seek our fortune," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. And the duck said, "Take me with you all the way. I will help you night and day." "But how are we going to carry you?" asked Krencipal and Krencipalka. "Just put me in your sack," answered the duck, and they did so. And they walked and walked till they met a cock. "Where are you off to?" asked the cock. "Into the world to seek our fortune," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. And the cock said, "Take me with you all the way. I will help you night and day." "But how are we going to carry you?" asked Krencipal and Krencipalka. "Just put me in with the duck," answered the cock, and they did so. And they walked and walked till they met a pig. "Where are you off to?" asked the pig. "Into the world to seek our fortune," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. And the pig said, "Take me with you all the way. I will help you night and day." "But how are we going to carry you?" asked Krencipal and Krencipalka. "You don't need to carry me," answered the pig. "Just drive me in front of you." And they did so. And they walked and walked till they met an ox. "Where are you off to?" asked the ox. "Into the world to seek our fortune," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. And the ox said, "Take me with you all the way. I will help you night and day." "Likely we're going to carry you," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. "You don't need to carry me," answered the ox. "I'll carry the missus and the basket as well." And he did so. And they walked and walked till they met a horse. "Where are you off to?" asked the horse. "Into the world to seek our fortune," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. And the horse said, "Take me with you all the way. I will help you night and day." "Likely we're going to carry you," said Krencipal and Krencipalka. "You don't need to carry me," answered the horse. "I'll carry you and the sack as well." And he did so. So Krencipal sat on the horse. Krencipalka sat on the ox. The basket was hung on the ox's horns, and the sack was hung on the horse's tail, and the pig ran on in front. And they walked and walked till they came to a wood. In this wood was a fine house in which no Christian soul might live, for it was inhabited by a wicked goblin. Krencipal and Krencipalka went into the house. The horse went into the stable. The ox went into the barn. The pig went into the sty. The cock went into the parlor. The duck went behind the kitchen stove. The lobster went into a bucket of water, and the needle went, eye downward, into a bench in front of the table. The pig told them to put some acorns to roast for him, and they did so. After a while, in came the goblin. "What are you doing here, Krencipal and Krencipalka?" he asked. "We are just passing the night here," they replied. "Pray sit down." And he did so. And the needle ran into him, for he had seated himself upon the bench. "Oh, oh, oh!" cried the goblin, and ran to the bucket for water to bathe the prick. When he put his hand into the bucket, the lobster seized it and squeezed it until the bones cracked. Out jerked the hand at once. "Oh, oh, oh!" cried the goblin, and ran to the fire for ashes to rub on his hand. But the acorns went bang, 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 and flew out and hit him in the eye. "Ee! cried the goblin, and ran to the barn for some straw that he might wipe his eye. But the ox caught him on its horns and threw him over its head into the stable, where the horse led out with his hind legs, and sent the goblin flying through the yard into the kitchen, and out by the front door. As he passed, the duck said, "Quack, quack, 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 quack," and the cock said, "Duck, duck, 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 duck." The goblin took to his heels and ran as fast as he could to the underworld. "What are you doing here?" asked his friends. "Why are you not at home?" "Home!" cried the goblin, his teeth chattering so that he could hardly speak. Never again." He sat down to get over his fright, but it was some time before his teeth stood still so that he could tell them what had happened to him. "My house is haunted by humans," he said as soon as he could speak. "I found 2 of them sitting at the table, and they asked me to take a bit of dinner with them. So I sat down on the bench, and the cook was crouched under the table and ran a skewer into me. I went to get some water to bathe the prick, and there was a tinker sitting in the bucket who pinched my hand so hard with his pincers that the bones cracked. I went to the fire to get some ashes to rub my hand with, and there was a soldier who shot at me, bang, 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 and hit me clean in the eye. I went to the barn for some straw to wipe my eye, and there was a haymaker who tossed me up in the air with his pitchfork and right over into the stable. And there was a blacksmith who gave me such a knock with his hammer that I went flying through the yard, into the kitchen, and out by the front door. As I passed, another of these creatures called out, "Smack, smack, 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 smack him well!" And another called, "Chuck, chuck, 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 chuck him out!" And I'll never go home again. So Krencipal and Krencipalka stayed on in the fine house and lived there happily ever after. End of section 11, read by laurakgibbs.
Section 12 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Brenda McCracken. A Polish Story, A Horned Goat, by Lucia Morecka-Borski and Kate B. Miller. There once was a goat, a wicked horned goat. She was at war with everyone, did mischief to all, butted with her horns, stomped her feet, and threatened, "I, a hairy horned goat. Whoever touches me will fare badly. I will stomp him with my feet. I will beat him with my tail, and I'll eat him up." All feared her because she threatened them terribly. She grew bold, minded nobody, pillaged every garden. What she could not eat, she broke, stomped on, damaged. All suffered because all were afraid. One day she went into a tailor's garden. The tailor sat sewing at the window. When he spied the goat among his cabbages, he jumped up shouting, but the goat minded him not, just as if she heard him not. "Oh, your hour has come. Do you think a tailor is afraid of a goat?" shouted the master. He caught up his big tailor's shears, jumped through the window, and ran towards the goat, opening and shutting his shears all the while. The goat saw a tailor for the first time. For the first time also, she saw shears, and she became frightened at the brave tailor. She ran. He followed her, opening and shutting his shears all the time. The tailor was thin, lean, and light, and he had long legs. But still the goat ran faster on her 4 feet than the tailor could on his 2. She escaped him. The tailor fell on the grass puffing. "I am a hero. There is none braver than I," he said, and went home a proud and haughty man. The goat kept on running. Leaving the road, she ran through a thick forest until, almost ready to drop from exhaustion, she fell into a fox's den. "I shall remain here. The tailor won't find me here," she said. She stayed there, but she was so frightened that she trembled all over. By this time, Mrs. Fox came home, but she could not get into her den, as it was occupied by the goat. "Who is in there?" she called angrily. The goat was afraid, but she shouted loudly, "I, a hairy horned goat. Whoever touches me will fare badly. I will stomp him with my feet. I will beat him with my tail, and I'll eat him up." Mrs. Fox almost fainted from fear. She went aside and sat, crying that she had no place to go. Soon Mr. Fox came home, and seeing his wife in distress, he asked her, "What has happened to you, mother? Why do you cry?" She answered, "A terrible misfortune has befallen us. Somebody went into our den, does not want to come out, and threatens to eat us up." "Oh, who can it be?" said the fox. "I will make him come out." Together they went to the den. The fox, knowing he was in the right, asked boldly in a deep voice, "Who is in there?" The goat was very much frightened, but she shouted with all her might, "I, a hairy, horned goat. Whoever touches me will fare badly. I will stomp him with my feet, I will beat him with my tail, and I'll eat him up." The fox lowered his head, hung his tail between his hind legs, and whispered, "I am not strong enough to make it come out. I cannot help." They went away into the forest, crying bitterly. A hare met them and stopped, wondering. He said, "This is news, this is news. Mr. Fox crying?" "Oh, this is nothing. I have only tasted some strong tobacco," explained the fox, wiping his eyes with shame. "Tobacco? A goat and not tobacco? A goat went into our den and will not come out. Where shall we go now, poor orphans?" cried Mrs. Fox. The hare, being kind-hearted, felt sorry for the foxes, cried with them a little, and then said, "Am I, a hare of hares, afraid of a foolish goat? We shall see." He whisked past the foxes to their dens so fast they could barely follow him, and called, "Who is in there? Come right out!" The goat became more and more frightened because she thought there were many animals in the forest, and although some were afraid of her, there would come one that would chase her out of the den. And outside the den, the tailor with his big shears awaited her. She stomped her feet and cried in a fearful voice, "I, a hairy, horned goat. Whoever touches me will fare badly. I will stomp him with my feet, I will beat him with my tail, and I'll eat him up." The hare jumped aside and fled, as if a whole leash of greyhounds pursued him. When he saw, however, that no one was after him, he felt ashamed and went back to the foxes. Now the foxes were asking the wolf to help them. Mrs. Fox sat under a bush, adding a word or two to the gentleman's conversation. Mr. Fox, arm in arm with the wolf, paced to and fro, putting the whole matter up to the wolf. "What shall we do now?" the fox kept saying. "It is of no use looking for a new place, as all the dens, small holes, and even last year's nests are occupied. Everything has its corner and a roof over its head, except us, poor orphans. We, foxes of foxes that were used to live comfortably, what shall we do when the little cubs come? Help us, Mr. Wolf, as you are our relative, friend, and godfather, and I am helpless." The wolf listened patiently and said, gnashing his teeth, "You will be sleeping on her skin yet, you'll see. Lead me to your den. It's time to end this evil thing." They went to the den, the hare scampering after them. The goat heard them coming and closed her eyes, thinking her last hour had come. The wolf gnashed his teeth, shouting, "Who is in there?" The goat, awaiting her death, at first could not make a sound. But then, in her terrible fright, she screamed in a voice she could not recognize as her own. "I, a hairy, horned goat," and threatened as she always had before. When the wolf heard that the goat would stomp him with her feet and beat him with her tail, he became so frightened that he flattened his ears, stepped aside from the den, and whispered to the fox, "I cannot help it. It is too much for me." "Well, didn't I say so?" groaned the fox. "Such is my misfortune, to die meanly because of a horned goat." They all wept and cried aloud. Going further into the forest, they met a bear coming up to them. He was very much satisfied with himself, having just eaten a lot of sweet honey. He was somewhat bitten by the bees who guarded their property. One part of his face was swollen, but he did not care, the hairy beast. Hearing so much lamentation, he stopped and asked what had happened. They all began talking at the same time, making so much noise that the bear covered up his ears and shouted to them to speak one at a time. Otherwise he could not understand them, and they would make him deaf. Mrs. Fox had a greater ability for talking than the rest, and so she described their sad affliction, saying unpleasant things about each and every helper. The bear laughed heartily, repeating time after time, "They're afraid of a goat? They're afraid of a horned goat?" The fox and the wolf resented the bear's belittling remarks, but they said nothing, as they wished him to help them. When the bear stopped laughing, he said, "All right, now let us go to the goat, but I must take along my 2 helpers." His 2 helpers were a crab and a hedgehog. The crab walked along slowly, moved his claws, and threatened, "I am a crab, and this is the way I pinch." The hedgehog rolled on his short feet, stuck out his needles, and kept on saying, "I am a hedgehog, and this is the way I prick." The bear called his helpers, and the whole crowd went to the den. The bear asked the goat, "How fare you in the den, my nanny goat?" The goat was terror-stricken because she had never heard such a gruff voice, but she threatened as usual. "I will stomp you with my feet, I will beat you with my tail, and I'll eat you up." "Oh, dear me," laughed the bear. "Eat up fast, don't delay. I'll send you down too." Turning to those around him, he continued, "The crab and the hedgehog will go in to chase out the goat. The wolf and I will wait at the mouth of the den to catch her. Mr. and Mrs. Fox had better wait on top of the hill to get her in case she should slip from our hands. The hare, being the fastest, had better run to the other side of the hill. Should she pass us all, he won't let her go." The crab pinched the goat with all his strength, and the hedgehog rolled with his needles over her back, so that the goat whisked away from the den immediately, dashed by the bear and the wolf, ran up the hill so fast that the foxes stepped aside. The hare watched better than the rest. He jumped straight on her back and did not let her go. The whole crowd came running to mete out justice to the goat. "Well," said the bear, "you got what you asked for. Your end has now come. Let the foxes judge you, for they are the ones you wronged." The goat saw that she was in trouble and that no one was afraid. So she began from a different angle. She stomped her feet, held her sides, and mocked them. "What heroes you are, all of you together to get 1 goat, a bear and a wolf, 2 foxes and a hare, and those other 2 have not reached me yet. Now you're so anxious to get to my skin. Hasten with my end, otherwise I'll make you known throughout the forest." They were ashamed and afraid that the other animals might hear the goats shouting, and so the wolf said, "All right, we will not go against you, a crowd against 1. If you wish, we can have a proper war. Let us each gather an army and meet again in 3 days. Agreed?" "Agreed," shouted everybody. Even the goat agreed, for what could she do? Just the same, she was glad that she gained 3 days' time. They parted to gather their armies. The goat's enemies did not even try to gather an army, laughing at the thought of her army. The bear, the wolf, and the fox, just the 3 of them, were ready to fight the goat, as it did not become Mrs. Fox to fight. The crab and the hedgehog could not be found, and they were ashamed to ask the hare, for he was the one who had caught the goat. It went worse with the goat. She was afraid of the tailor, and she had accounts with other people. Where could she look for an army? She went hither and thither, but from each that she asked, a dog or a horse, she received the same answer. You brewed the beer, drink it yourself. Besides, they were afraid to fight a bear and a wolf. The goat was desperate. She thought to herself, I will surely pay with my head, and I must keep my word, and I cannot find anybody to help me. But on the third day she came across Latek, a dog, with a scalded side, who was willing to help her. He licked his side, saying, I might just as well fight as not. I have one war with my master for killing his lamb, and another war with my mistress for the lard she did not lock up in time. I may have a third war in the forest, I don't mind. Let us go. There are not enough of us. We need at least one more, said the goat. I'll bring along 2 more, promised the dog. Soon he brought with him a dark gray cat and a swaggering rooster who was not afraid of anything. There are 4 of us now, and that makes a whole army, said the dog. Let us go. They went to the forest. The 3 left in the forest had grown tired of waiting a long time for the goat's army. The fox at last begged the bear, Oh, brother, you know how to climb trees. Go up a pine and you may see them from the height. The bear climbed the pine, looked around, and called down, They're coming, but do you know it is a fierce-looking army? One shouts, Let me have him, let me have him. The second one crawls along the ground, scenting our tracks. The third one has a glistening sword hanging down his side. And this terrible goat to make the matters worse. Well, my dears, you better look out for yourselves, for I am not coming down this pine. At once the wolf leaped aside and ran away. The fox dug into the moss so that only the tip of his tail was seen. The goat came with her army, looking for her enemies, but she found nobody. After a while, the cat spied the fox's tail and grabbed it with his sharp claws. The fox jumped out, shouting dreadfully, and in a fright the goat's army ran in different directions. The cat was frightened the most, and he ran up the tree to where the bear sat. They're after me, thought the terrified bear. He let go of the branch where he sat and fell down to the ground with such a shock that the earth around trembled. Both armies ran away, scattered by fear. Well, well, grumbled the bear. Now I may wander for 3 days and not meet anyone, and my sides ache so that I will not last without a massage. If I only catch sight of the hare, he is kind-hearted, he will save me. Somehow he got up and went along moaning, when of a sudden he heard nearby the goat's doleful bleating. If I could only get a hold of you, I'd make your sides ache too, thought the bear to himself. Just then the goat appeared in front of him. The hare sat on her back, holding her fast by her horns, and threatening, I will not let you go. You must be punished. You lost the war as I caught you fleeing. Let the fox judge you. Oh, Mr. Hare, called the delighted bear. Run, brother, bring me some mosquito fat, as I must be massaged after the war. My sides are so badly beaten that I can hardly stand. All my hope is in you, that you will save me, because I cannot go far by myself. The hare did not hesitate a moment. He jumped off the goat's back and scuttled away for the mosquito fat. This was all the goat needed. She knew the bear could not chase her, so she leaped aside and ran away. She ran 1 day, 2, 3. She ran 6 weeks and a year, and maybe she runs to this very day. End of section 12. Section 13 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Brenda McCracken. A Swedish Story, The Three Gifts, by Eva March Tappan. There were once 3 young men who were suitors for the hand of the same girl. They were strangers to one another, and as she let one call on Monday, one on Wednesday, and one on Friday, they never came at the same time and never met. As for the girl, she liked every one of them so well that she hardly knew which to choose. And if it had not been for New Year's Day, she might still be sitting in an armchair by the western window, trying to decide. New Year's Day was coming, and each one of them planned to go and wish her a happy new year. It came to pass that they all arrived at the same time. The girl tried to talk with them all, but they sat and scowled at one another, and the longer they stayed, the crosser they became, for each was wishing that the others would go. At last the girl said, "I don't think we are having a very good time. You all want to marry me, and I honestly do not know which one to choose. Now will you let me make a test? Will you go away for a year, and when the year is past, bring me each a gift? I promise that the one bringing the gift that I like best shall be my husband." Now that they were all to have exactly the same chance, they could not be jealous of one another, and they started off on their journey all together. At evening they came to the crossroads. They agreed that each should take one of the 3 roads, and that at the end of the year they should meet at the same place to compare their gifts before they presented them to the girl. Then they separated quite in friendly fashion and not at all as enemies. The first went far, far away. He roamed from one city to another, but somehow he could not find just what seemed to him the very best thing in the world for his gift. One warm day when he was thirsty, he happened to pass by an old woman who was selling apples on the street. He took up one and said, "How much are these a measure, my good woman?" The woman smiled and said, "Take one and you will have a measure. I think that would be enough if you have the money to buy only one of the apples." "What does the woman mean?" he exclaimed, and he looked a little offended. "What is there so wonderful about your apples?" "These are not common fruit, such as you can pick from every tree," she replied. "If anyone is so sick that the doctors have given him up, let him eat a bit from one of these apples, and he will be up and well in no time at all." The young man did not delay any longer. Indeed, he was afraid that someone would be before him, and he paid a high price for just one apple, so he could carry it to the girl. The second suitor wandered about fully as long as the first, roaming around from place to place in search of something that would be fine enough to serve for his gift. He too went from town to town, and at length he happened to go by the workshop of a joiner. Outside the shop stood all kinds of tables and chairs, and as he was feeling tired just then, he sat down for a moment in a big easy chair. The master of the shop came out, and the suitor said, "This is a very comfortable chair. How much is it?" The master told him what it cost, and the suitor walked about among the furniture, looking at one thing and another. "And that old broken thing over there?" said the suitor, and pointed to a broken easy chair that stood near him. "How much is that?" The master named so high a price that the suitor laughed. "I'm not so stupid as to pay all that for a shabby old thing," he said, and turned to leave the shop. "Hold on a moment," called the master. "I am not trying to cheat you. It is only that you do not know the remarkable quality which that chair possesses." "What remarkable quality do you mean?" asked the suitor. "Well," said the master, I think you will agree with me that it is a valuable chair when I tell you that if a man seats himself in it and wishes one thing or another, it makes no difference what, his wish will come to pass on the instant. It did not take the suitor long to decide to buy the chair, even though it did cost almost all the money he had in the world. He stood and gazed at his purchase and rubbed his hands for joy. "That is the thing for my sweetheart," he said to himself. "Surely nothing can please her more, for with this she can have whatever else she may want just by making a wish." So he put the chair on his shoulder and carried it off to his lodgings, and there he sat and gazed at it until it was time to go to meet the other suitors. The third suitor had also gone far away, up and down in the country and criss-cross from city to city, but nothing had he found that seemed to him half wonderful enough to give to so wonderful a girl. At length, when he had almost given up the search, he came to a store full from top to bottom of beautiful things. Among these were multitudes of looking-glasses of all sizes and sorts. He asked the price of many of them, but did not see just what seemed of value enough for his gift. At last he saw in a rather dark corner a shabby little glass, and he asked more in jest than in earnest, "How much is that handsome mirror over there?" The merchant named a large price. "I am not sure that I have so much money in the world," said the suitor, laughing. "You'd do well to take every shilling of it and buy this glass," declared the merchant soberly, "for in it you can see at any moment whatever you choose to name. Try it if you like." So the young man looked into the glass and wished that he might see her whom he loved, and at once he saw her as she stood coiling up her hair. This was enough. "I must have the glass," he said, and he willingly paid all his money and bought it. "Surely this is a gift of more value," he thought, "than either of the others can give." When the year had come to its end, the three suitors met at the crossroads as they had agreed, and each one showed what he had bought. The first showed the apple, the second the easy chair, the third held up his looking-glass, and they all took a look. They saw the girl, but alas, she lay on her bed, sick unto death. Her parents were weeping. Doctors stood about her, but they were helpless to save her life. Then the first suitor cried, "Oh, if I was only there with my apple!" And the second cried, "Let us seat ourselves in my easy chair and wish that we were there." And in a moment all three were in the room of the sick girl. Quick as a flash, the first cut a bit of apple and pressed it between her lips. In a breath, she raised her head and her arms, and before one could call her name, she was no longer ill, but as well as ever in all her life. But which gift saved the girl's life? And which suitor did she marry? End of section 13.
Section 14 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Cabbage Stalk. Adapted from the Portuguese of Consigliere Pedroso. Not far from where the Douro rolls its course seaward, there once lived a little Portuguese maiden, the daughter of a poor farmer. One summer she begged her father to give her a small plot of ground for a kitchen garden, but all he could spare her was a bit of ground so poor that nothing would grow there except one large cabbage. This little Sevilla tended most carefully, giving it water each day. The season was cold, and most of the crops were poor, so that both Sevilla and her father watched the big cabbage, hoping it would provide at least one good meal. One day, when the little girl was looking at her cabbage, she noticed that the stalk formed a ladder by which it was possible to descend into the ground. Astonished and a little afraid, her curiosity drew her to try this ladder, and soon she found herself in a splendid palace. As she wandered from one place to another, she saw nobody. But in one room there was a comfortable-looking bed with snow-white coverlets, and in another room stood a table spread with dainties such as Sevilla had never before seen. After looking about again, and being sure there was nobody whose permission she could ask, the hungry girl at last seated herself and enjoyed the feast. When she had finished, she climbed up the cabbage stalk again and went home. After that, whenever she felt hungry, she went down the cabbage stalk and found a feast awaiting her. Soon she began to grow plump, much to the surprise of her parents, who had begun to worry because she ate scarcely anything so far as they knew. At night, after her parents were asleep, Sevilla got up from her hard little bed and went down the cabbage stalk to sleep between the down covers of the little white bed. At last, one night, the mother heard her daughter moving about in her room, and followed her when she went out and down the cabbage stalk. The mother carried a lighted candle in her hand, and when she reached the palace, she found her daughter asleep in the bed, and, curled on the floor at its foot, fast asleep also, lay a terrible-looking beast. In her fright, the woman stumbled, and 3 drops of tallow fell from the candle upon the sleeping beast. Immediately it became transformed into a handsome young prince. The prince looked sadly at Sevilla, who had awakened, and at her mother, and said, "You little know what harm you have done me. You have broken my spell before its rightful time of ending. Now I must away to have cured the 3 burns you have inflicted upon me." Then he told Sevilla to leave the palace, and he gave her a new cloak, a pair of iron shoes, and a staff, and begged that when the shoes were worn out she would come to see him again. Sevilla and her mother then left the palace, and scarcely had they climbed the cabbage stalk than the ladder disappeared. The mother went back to the cottage, but Sevilla set out and walked until the shoes began to wear out, and she went about begging for alms. At last, one evening, she came to the home of an old woman who invited her to spend the night. As Sevilla helped the old crone prepare the supper, she told her story. "Yes," said the old woman, "I have heard of you and your prince, but I fear there is no use in going back to him, for there is now in the palace a princess who is to be his bride." Then Sevilla was sad and wept, so that the old woman felt sorry for her and gave her a rock of gold, a gold spinning wheel, and a gold reel. Next morning she wished the girl good luck and sent her on her way. Sevilla traveled many weary hours, and at last she arrived at the palace gate with her shoes worn and garments all torn, and begged for alms. The princess, looking out of her window, saw the rock of gold that Sevilla carried. She sent one of her maids to ask what the beggar girl would take for it. "Neither food nor jewels will I take for it," she answered. "But if I may be allowed to spend one night in the prince's room, the gold rock shall be yours." The princess would not consent, but the prince's mother told her to allow the girl to sleep at the prince's feet, for they could give him a sleeping draught, so that he would not know anyone was there. And so it happened that Sevilla was allowed to go into the prince's room without the prince knowing it. Then, when all the house was still, she began to sing. "Many leagues have I travelled, prince, to thee. My shoes and clothes in tatters be. Travel-worn is my staff, weary I be. Yet here am I come back to thee." But the prince never stirred in his sleep, and when dawn came, the princess had her servants drive Sevilla forth. Once outside the palace, the little maid set to work with her gold spinning wheel. The princess, looking out, saw her and sent to ask what she would take for the wheel. "Neither food nor jewels will I take for it," she answered. "But if again I be allowed to sleep a night in the prince's room, the wheel is yours." The princess consented, and again the prince was given a sleeping potion, so that although Sevilla sang and spoke to him all night long, he could not be roused. With daybreak came the servants of the princess and drove her forth again. But the prince's valet, who had spent the night in the next room, told the prince of the words he had heard spoken and sung during the night. Much astonished, the prince readily took his valet's advice not to drink from the goblet that the princess offered him each night before he retired to his own suite of rooms. That day the princess saw Sevilla at work with her golden reel, and again she made the same bargain with the girl in order to obtain the reel. When night came, the prince managed to stand near an open window when the princess brought him the golden goblet, and he quickly threw its contents into the garden when nobody was looking. Then he went to his room and pretended to sleep. Soon Sevilla entered, and kneeling by the bed began singing, "Many leagues have I travelled, prince, to thee. My shoes and clothing in tatters be. Travel worn is my staff, weary I be. Yet here am I come back to thee." The moment the prince heard her, he was very happy that he had found Sevilla again. But he was worried also, for he was pledged to the princess. So when morning came, he hid Sevilla and went to seek out the father of the princess. "I beg of you," he said, "answer me this matter that troubles me. My apartment has 2 keys. The first was mislaid and lost, but I ever had hopes of finding it. At last I ordered a new key made. Now I have the new key. The old one has reappeared. Which ought I to keep?" The old king advised him to retain the old one, whereupon the prince told the king the whole story of the little maid, and reminded him at the same time that it was he who had given the sentence. So the princess and her father went back to their kingdom, where in good time another husband was found for the princess. But the prince married Sevilla, and for many years they ruled his land together. End of section 14. Read by Gila Labinger Freeberg. Napa, February 4th, 2024.
Section 15 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. A Japanese Story, Shippei by Georgine Faulkner. Once upon a time there lived in Japan a brave young soldier, or samurai, named Wakiki Mononofu. One day, when he was traveling about the land in search of adventure, he lost his way in a dense forest on a wild and lonely mountainside. Night was coming on, and though he searched through the bushes and brambles, he could not find a single pathway that led out of the forest. Every way he turned, he seemed to be more hopelessly lost in the briars and tall grasses which grew thickly on all sides. Weary and faint for want of food, he stumbled on in the darkness until at last he came to a clearing in the forest where he beheld a ruined temple. A storm was coming up, and the young warrior was very glad to find shelter. "This temple shall be my palace for the night," he said, "and here I will be safe from the wrath of the storm god. I will wrap my warm mantle about me and sleep upon the floor, and dream of glory and adventure." So, with his good sword by his side and his mantle wrapped around him, he lay down upon the floor and was soon fast asleep. Towards midnight he was awakened by a dreadful noise. At first he thought that he must have had a bad dream. But as the noise grew louder and louder, he sprang to his feet, and seizing his sword, looked out of the temple door. The storm clouds had passed, and the moon was peeping out, and to his horror he saw in the moonlight a strange sight. A troop of hideous cats were dancing about the temple, yowling, "Meow, meow, meow, ow, meow, ow, ow." They were led by a giant black cat, and all were so terrible to look upon that the young soldier shivered with fear, crouching down behind the wall of the temple, for fear of being seen. Then he heard them singing through the terrible groans, "Tell it not to Schippeitaro that the phantom cats are here. Tell it not to Schippeitaro, lest he soon appear." And as the midnight hour passed, the phantom cats gave a chorus of wild yowls and disappeared as suddenly as they had come. Wakiki looked out upon the moonlight shining like silver over the snow-capped mountain in the distance. All about him was still. No longer afraid, he wrapped himself in his long mantle and slept soundly until the sun goddess was high in the sky. In the morning he started down the mountain-side, and was soon able to find a path which led him through the forest and down into the valley, where he saw a village. As he was very hungry, he hurried to the nearest home to ask for food. Drawing near, he heard voices from within the house and the sound of crying. But he knocked upon the door, and it was opened by a young girl whose eyes were red with tears. "Ohayo," he said, bowing low. "All night in the storm I was lost upon the mountainside, and I am very hungry. Would you kindly give me a bowl of rice?" "You are most welcome, honorable stranger," answered the girl. "Enter and be our honorable guest at breakfast with my parents." The parents of the girl also gave the young warrior a cordial greeting, and soon he was seated upon the floor between them. A small table was placed before him, upon which was a bowl of rice and a cup of tea. After finishing his breakfast, Wakiki bowed low and said, "My honorable friends, I thank you for a good meal." "You have been most welcome, honorable guest," said the master of the house. "May peace and happiness attend you." "And may all you and your household know happiness, honorable host," said the young soldier, bowing low. "We can never be happy again," said the old man sadly, as he watched his daughter follow her mother from the room. And from behind the screen the young soldier could hear bitter weeping. "You seem to have a terrible sorrow," said the soldier. "Yes," answered the old man, "we are in great trouble. You must know, brave samurai, that upon the mountains of this forest there stands an old and ruined temple. It was once a shrine of the gods, but now it is haunted by evil spirits. Every year a black demon, or mountain spirit of evil, comes to this temple, leading his army of evil spirits, and claims a victim from the village. These mountain demons demand that the fairest maiden in the village be brought to them in a cage, else they will come and destroy the whole village. Alas, this year my daughter has been chosen for the sacrifice." And burying his face in his long sleeve, the old man groaned aloud. "Indeed, I should think that the young maidens of the village would all wish to be ugly," said the young man, "since the fairest must be fed to this demon. But do not grieve, my honorable friend. I think I know of a way to save your daughter. Tell me, who is Schippeitaro?" "Schippeitaro is a strong and beautiful white dog," replied the old man. "He belongs to the headman of our prince, who lives not far from here. We often see this fine brave dog following his master about the streets. But why do you ask about the dog?" "Only trust me," answered the soldier, "and all will be well. Keep your daughter in your home. Guard her closely." Now all the time the old man had been telling the young soldier about the terrible demons, the young man was thinking of his adventure of the night before, and of the horrible phantom cats which had danced and yowled about the ruined old temple. He remembered the song they had sung, and felt that they had reason to fear Schippeitaro. The young soldier hurried away, and fortunately near the castle he met the servant of the prince with his big dog Schippeitaro. "Will you lend me your strong dog for one night?" asked the young soldier. "Why would you ask such a favor?" said the servant of the prince. "My dog is strong and powerful, and he helps me guard the castle." "I only need him for this one night," said the soldier. "I must have him to help me save the life of a fair maiden in this village." "Well, for tonight only," said the servant, "since you desire him so much, but upon one condition only, that you will bring him back safe and sound in the morning." "This shall be done," promised the young warrior. "I will protect Xipiituro with my sword and my life, and tomorrow he shall return to you in safety." The young warrior then took the great dog with him, and when evening came, placed Xipiituro in the cage which was to have carried the maiden. Some of the young men of the village carried the cage to the ruined temple, and when they reached the little shrine in the forest, put the cage on the ground, and ran down the mountainside as if a whole troop of hobgoblins were chasing at their heels. With no companion but the great dog, the young warrior remained in the ruined temple. Just at midnight, when the full moon was high in the heavens, shedding a silvery light over the mountainside, the fearful troop of phantom cats came out, led by the great giant cat. "Meow, meow, 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 wow," they shrieked, as they danced wildly about, and then through their terrified groans and moans the young man heard them chant the same song. "Tell it not to Xipiituro that the phantom cats are here. Tell it not to Xipiituro, lest he soon appear." Scarcely had the song ended when the monster cat caught sight of the cage, and with wild yells of triumph he sprang upon it. With one blow from his strong paw he broke open the door of the cage, ready to devour the dainty maiden. But to his surprise, out jumped the powerful dog Xipiituro. "Yeri-ri-ri-yeri!" barked the dog, as much as to say, "Here, here, here, here! I'll end this here!" And seizing the big cat, he shook him by the throat. With a loud shout, the young samurai drew his sword and ran to the help of the brave dog. The frightful battle was soon over, for when the other cats saw their leader was dead, they lost courage and were easily killed. The young warrior brought back the noble dog to his master, and told the father and mother of the maiden that their daughter was free, and that the whole village was free, for the phantom cats could never trouble them again. "Brave warrior, how can I ever thank you for all you have done for us?" said the young maiden. "I am the only child of my aged parents, and there would have been no one to care for them if you had not saved me." "You must not thank me," said the young soldier. "I could never have won this battle alone. You owe it all to the noble dog Xipiituro, for he killed the phantom cats." Then the young girl made a wreath of flowers, or obi, and tied it about the great white dog. All the people of the village, with garlands of flowers, marched with the young soldier and the dog to the castle of the prince. The samurai told his story to the servant of the prince, and thanked him for his part in saving the life of the maiden, by lending him the brave dog Xipiituro. Then all the people shouted and sang songs. "All honor be to Xipiituro, the brave, the noble Xipiituro. When the cruel cats came near, Xipiituro showed no fear. Now the cats will return no more. We can live in peace forever. All honor be to Xipiituro, the brave and noble Xipiituro." End of section 15. Section 16 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. An African Hussa Story, The Water of Ladi, by Eric Berry. This, then, is the tale of the Water of Ladi. A certain hunter went into the forest to live and built a hut there. His wife gave him 2 children, a boy and a girl, and when the old couple died, the 2 were left alone. And they lived there, and always when the youth went away to hunt, he would shut his sister in the house for safety, and close the door with thorns. And when he returned from the day's hunting, he would stand outside and call, "Fatismata! Fatismata! Open the door for me to enter." and when she heard this she would open the door that he might come in. Now of a truth the hyena overheard this, and one day when the youth was hunting in the forest, the hyena came to the door of the hut and called, "Fatimita, Fatimita, open the door that I may enter." But the girl said, "No, I know who you are. You have a lisp. You are the hyena." Then the hyena went off and sought the lion. From the lion he asked for medicine that would cure a lisp, and the lion gave it to him. He came back to the door of the hut and called, "Fatismata, Fatismata, open the door that I may enter." So the maiden opened the door, and the hyena seized her and swallowed her and disappeared into the forest. And at evening the brother of the girl returned from hunting, but when he stood in front of the door of his hut and called, "Fatismata, Fatismata, open the door that I may enter," there was only silence. He called again, but again no one answered him. He repeated his call 3 times, and then he pushed on the door. It swung open, and he entered. The hut was empty, and his sister was gone. Then he came out, lifted his calabash to his head, and travelled until he reached the mouth of the hyena's cave. He saw the girl's waist beads and skirt cloth lying at the mouth of the hole, and he said, "The hyena has done this thing," and he passed on. Now there was a certain pool where all the wild animals of the place came to drink water. There was no other water but this. The youth went there, and he knelt down, and taking his magic calabash, drew up all the water from the pool into it. Then he climbed into a tall tree and waited there. There was no water left in the pool. Then came a herd of elephants to the pool. They were about to drink when the youth called out, "You there, elephant, where are you going?" And the head elephant replied, "We are going to the water of Lodi to drink." Then said the youth, "There is no water in the pool of Lodi. When you have given up the one who has eaten my sister, then I will give you back the waters of Lodi." And the elephant replied, "There is nothing in me but my stomach." And he went and lay down with the other elephants. A herd of bush cows came up, and the boy called to one of them, "You, bush cow, where are you going?" And the bush cow replied, "We are going to drink at the water of Lodi." And the youth in the tree replied, "The water of Lodi has dried. When you give me the one who has eaten my sister, then I will give you back the water." But the bush cow replied that he had nothing inside him but his stomach, and like the elephant he went and lay down and waited. Whatever herd of wild animals came up to drink, the boy asked for his sister. They too made answer so, and passed on and lay down, panting for thirst, until all the animals in the forest had passed. There remained only the hyena and his family. They came up. The hyena who had eaten the maiden was in front. He was very thirsty and in haste to drink, and the youth called down, "You, hyena, where are you going?" And the hyena replied, "I am going to the water of Lodi." Whereat the youth said, "The water of Lodi is dried. If you will give me back my sister, I will give you back the water of Lodi." The hyena was silent. What was there he could say? Then the youth said again, "When you give me back my sister, I will give you back the water of Lodi." He said this 3 times, and the hyena said nothing. But the lion, who was also thirsty and waiting for a drink, became angry and leaped upon and caught the hyena and tore him in 2. The maiden came out, and the lion said, "Behold your sister." So the youth poured out the water for them because he had found his sister alive, and the 2 went home again to their hut in the forest. End of section 16.
Section 17 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Native American Seneca Story. How the Red Fox Made Fun of Stubby Whitetail, by Arthur C. Parker. When you are angry at your victim, don't forget that there are hunters after your own skin. Rumbling Wings. Rabbit was hopping along as fine as you please and chewing a leaf of mustard. He felt very contented and capery, and so ran in his hippity style, leaping and hopping all around 7 stumps and a patch of squirrel grass. He was feeling especially good that day and never dreamed of a quarrel. Along came Red Fox, all out of sorts and feeling mean. For one thing, he had stalked a grouse and hadn't caught it. It flew away. Now Red Fox was hungry. Yes, he was very hungry. He swore in his mad mind that his next victim should suffer all kinds of torment. It was then that Red Fox saw Rabbit chewing his mustard leaf and hopping all around. "The miserable hopper," thought Red Fox. "What business has anyone to be happy when I am so hungry?" Then he burst right out with a mean sort of bark. "Hello, you old hippity-hopper!" Rabbit only rolled his eyes and wrinkled his nose as he chewed. "Quay there, you know nothing, no account!" growled Red Fox. Rabbit only wriggled his tail and chewed more on his leaf. "Quay there, you pop-eyed sunfish!" growled Red Fox, showing his teeth, hoping to get Rabbit angry. Rabbit hitched forward a bit and stood up, twisting his ears. "Quay there, you toad-eyed tree frog!" Red Fox snorted. "You've got to answer me now." If he could only make Rabbit mad, or ask him a question he could not answer, it would be an excuse to eat him. "Quay there, sunny weather," replied Rabbit, wrinkling his nose. "Of course I'll answer anything you ask me, if you'll answer me." "I've got you now," sniffed Red Fox. "You just tell me what makes your eyes so big." He didn't think poor Rabbit knew. "Looking for big bears to kill for supper," replied Rabbit. "Well then, what makes your nose wriggle so? Tell me that." "Smelling along for big bears to eat. That's the way I find 'em." "This time, tell me what makes your ears so long." "Listening for panthers. I just must kill one a day." "So now you tell me why your foolish tail is so stubby." "Oh, that's easy. So I won't lash it around and kill too many foxes." "Is that so, huh? Answer me why your feet have fur on the bottom." "Decent people don't go barefooted all the time. You ought to know that," laughed Rabbit, not even frowning. "Is that so?" growled Red Fox, getting madder. "Tell me then why your homely mouth wriggles all the time. It makes me sick." "Oh, I just do that when I chew up elk bones." "Huh. Why then are your shoulders so close together?" "Shh," answered Rabbit. "The little girls all like me. I always have 2 with me, 1 on each side, and they crowd me so that my shoulders get pushed together. Aren't you jealous of me?" Fox was now furious. He wanted to make Rabbit so angry he could not answer a question, and then Fox would pounce on him and give him a good shaking, for that was his way when his victims failed to reply. "Say, you whiskered nose," called out Rabbit. "It's my turn to ask questions." "Go ahead," growled Red Fox. "I am going to eat you soon anyway." "What makes your nose so long?" looking for foolish rabbits. What makes your fur so red? The blood of my victims. What makes your feet black? That's nothing to you, growled Fox, as furious as could be, because once he had been burned black by the other animals for getting into mischief. Oh, Fox never likes to have anyone mention his black marks on ears, feet, and tail. You didn't answer my question, so I win the question contest, laughed Rabbit. Oh, Fox, you are stumped. I got black, stammered Red Fox. Grrr, I got black because I am going to eat you now. Yip, yip. And on he dashed right at Rabbit, but Rabbit jumped high into the air and over Red Fox's head. Then he leaped into a hollow log that had a hole in the bottom. Rabbit had another hole there, and it went into the ground. Red Fox now began to claw away at the earth under the log. He dug and he dug until his head was far out of sight. Every once in a while, Rabbit would squeal to make believe he was frightened. Red Fox would then dig all the faster. Creeping up from behind was a red hunter with a drawn arrow. Fox was digging, and the red hunter was aiming. Wing! Went the feathered arrow. Whoosh! Went the arrow as it sank into Red Fox's heart. The red hunter ran up. A little boy was with him. Pick up Red Fox and look him over, and then tell me what you observe, said the red hunter. Red Fox is shot through the heart. He was digging for a rabbit, answered the boy. That's right, answered the red hunter. More than that, Red Fox was mad at Rabbit because he couldn't get at him. What makes you say that? Inquired the boy. Because, replied the red hunter, if he had not been angry, he would have heard us coming up behind him. Just you remember this. When you are angry with your victim, don't forget that there are hunters after your own skin. Down in the hole under the log, Rabbit laughed as the hunter skinned the red fox. I didn't get mad one bit, he chuckled. They didn't get me, neither Red Fox nor Red Hunter. End of section 17. Read by Gila Labinger Freeberg. Napa, January 22nd, 2024.
Section 18 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Nancy Beard. A Native American Wyandot Story, The Golden Hornet, by William E. Connolly. It was night. The wise men went to the trees on the bank of a swift, clear river. They kindled a fire and sat about it. To him who wrote, they said, "Write what we shall tell you about the golden hornet." Long ago there was an Indian girl whose name was Swenowe. She could not live in the village with her clan. Some said she was too proud. Others said she had magic power and talked with those who were on their way to the land of the little people. She lived with her grandmother in a lodge in the forest. They were very poor. Sometimes they had no food. From the lodge they could see a high and beautiful mountain. Swenowe loved to watch it at sunset. On the top of this mountain, beyond the reach of any hunter, lived a very large bird. This bird was as tall as a tree. He was king of all the eagles, hawks, and owls on that mountain. He had great magic power. He could do wonderful things and was much feared. One day, Swenowe was walking in an old Indian field. A shadow fell over her. Looking up, she saw the king of birds flying down toward her. In great fright, she ran into the woods and crawled into a hollow log. The bird followed her. He flapped his wings and made a wind which blew down trees. His cries sounded like the roar of thunder. He took the log in his terrible claws and carried it away to his home in the mountain top. There he shook it to make Swenowe come out, but she was so frightened she would not. When the bird had gone away, the girl came out. From this high peak she could see only fog and clouds below her. She could not get down. She looked all about. She saw a large nest. In it were 2 young birds, each as large as an elk. The bird had killed their mother. So Swenowe had to live on the mountain. She greatly feared the king of birds. She was very sad. She wanted to go home to her grandmother, but there was no way. One day a golden hornet flew about the mountain top. It stopped before her. It remained in space, beating the air with its loud humming wings. She wondered at it, and as she looked, it changed into a handsome young Indian warrior. "I am the younger brother of the bird," he said. "On this high peak, his magic is too strong for me. I cannot take you away, but some way for you to get down will be found. In the valley below, I will keep you safe. There my magic is as great as his. I will not let him harm you." Then the fine young man became again a golden hornet. His shining wings beat the air before her. As she looked, the bird flew back to the peak. The hornet darted down and was gone. Swenowe thought long. She must find a way to get down from the mountain. Then she began to feed one of the young birds. She wanted it to grow rapidly, and she wanted it to be her friend. At last she was glad. The young bird could fly. One day, as it stood at the edge of the peak, she sprang upon its back and threw her arms around its neck. This threw the bird off the rock, and it went tumbling through the air. Soon it spread its wings and began to fly. With a small stick, Swenowe tapped it on the head to make it fly down to the valley. After a while, she could see the land. When they were about to come to the land, Swenowe heard the bird coming after them. His angry cries were terrible. Now she tapped the young bird's head sharply, and it came down quickly to the ground. She got down from the bird's back and pulled the long feathers from its wings so that it could not follow her. The golden hornet soon came to Swenowe. In an instant it was once more the fine young man. They went into a cave where the bird could not get them. The bird went away and did not come back. He was afraid of his brother, the golden hornet. The fine young man led Swenowe to the village. They were married. They lived in the lodge of her grandmother. Their children became the Hawk clan of the tribe. End of section 18.
Section 19 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. A Euro-American Story, When the Sky Fell, by Renee B. Stern. Once upon a time, in the big green woods, there lived a noisy blue jay. He talked so much and so fast that no one ever knew what he was talking about. But as he never said anything worthwhile, it didn't matter. One bright morning, Blue Jay was strutting on the moss beneath the big chestnut tree that stands on the edge of the big green woods near the pasture, when plop! Something hit him right on the crown of feathers he wears on top of his head. He stopped chattering for nearly 2 minutes. He was so frightened. Then he blinked and screamed, "The sky is falling! The sky is falling! I must tell all the animals in the big green woods!" And off he flew to spread the terrible news. First Blue Jay flew to the tree where Red Chipmunk lives, and at tap, 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 he rapped with his bill on Red Chipmunk's door. "Eek!" said Red Chipmunk. "Who's there? What is it?" "The sky is falling, Red Chipmunk!" shouted Blue Jay. "I must hurry to tell all our friends in the big green woods. Come on with me." So Red Chipmunk came out of his hollow tree, and he and Blue Jay hurried to the home of Gray Field Mouse, who lives on the edge of the big green woods. Gray Field Mouse was sunning herself on her doorstep when Blue Jay and Red Chipmunk came up, all out of breath. "Gray Field Mouse," chattered Blue Jay, "the sky is falling! The sky is falling! A piece hit me just now, and I'm rushing to tell all our friends in the big green woods that the sky is falling." Gray Field Mouse was terribly frightened at this news, so she joined Blue Jay and Red Chipmunk. They hurried along, and they hurried along, and they hurried along, until they came to Speckled Toad's home. "Speckled Toad!" shrieked Blue Jay, for he was getting more and more excited. "The sky is falling! The sky is falling! Come with us and help us tell all our friends." So Speckled Toad hopped along with his friends, and they hurried along, and they hurried along, and they hurried along, until they came to Brown Mole's home. He was out for his daily airing, but as the sun was too bright for his eyes, Prickly Porcupine was leading him, being careful not to get his stickers near Brown Mole's long nose and pretty soft fur. Blue Jay, Red Chipmunk, Gray Field Mouse, and Speckled Toad came up, all out of breath. "Oh, Brown Mole and Prickly Porcupine!" gasped Blue Jay. "The sky is falling! The sky is falling! What shall we do?" Brown Mole was terribly frightened, and he asked Prickly Porcupine to lead him right back to his nice dark hole. But Prickly Porcupine was a sensible chap, and he said, "Why don't we all go to Wise Owl? He will tell us what is best to do if the sky is really falling." So they all agreed to go to Wise Owl, and they hurried along, and they hurried along, and they hurried along, until they came to the big oak tree where Wise Owl lives. Blue Jay called, Red Chipmunk chattered, and Gray Field Mouse squeaked, but Speckled Toad, Brown Mole, and Prickly Porcupine didn't say a word. They didn't have to. The others made so much noise. Presently Wise Owl came out of his hole in the oak tree where he had been taking an afternoon nap. He was cross at being awakened in the daytime, but he asked what was wanted. "Wise Owl!" shouted Blue Jay. "The sky is falling! The sky is falling! What shall we do?" "Who says the sky is falling?" snapped Wise Owl, for he was still rather cross. "A piece hit me on the head," said Blue Jay. "I was under the big chestnut tree that stands on the edge of the big green woods near the pasture. I was so frightened I flew off to tell all my friends." "Nonsense," answered Wise Owl, looking like a judge with big spectacles. "The sky can't be falling. As long as I've lived in the big green woods, I've never known it to fall. Let's go back to the chestnut tree and see if anything happens. I'm sure it's quite safe there." "I'm afraid to go back," Blue Jay said. "Nonsense," answered Wise Owl again. "We can fly or run away if the sky is falling." So Blue Jay, Red Chipmunk, Gray Field Mouse, Speckled Toad, Brown Mole, Prickly Porcupine, and Wise Owl all went back to the big chestnut tree that stands on the edge of the big green woods near the pasture. They all stood under the tree waiting for something to happen. Sure enough, something suddenly dropped through the branches and fell with a soft thud on the green moss. And what do you suppose it was? A big green chestnut burr, all prickly and stickly. Then how they all laughed! Blue Jay loudest of all, and Red Chipmunk went back to his tree, and Gray Field Mouse to her home, where her babies were waiting for her to get supper, and Speckled Toad hopped off to where he knew there were some fat flies. Then Prickly Porcupine led Brown Mole back to his warm dark hole, and Wise Owl went back to his oak tree. But Blue Jay flew away to the other end of the big green woods, laughing so hard that his topknot shook. End of section 19.
Section 20 of Tales of 1928. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Euro-American story, The Round Castle of the Red Sea, by Romer Wilson. Once upon a time, I may as well tell you, there lived in these parts a king with his wife and their only child, who was a little boy. One day the king said to his wife, "I think I'll go now to visit my gardens in the forest. Will you come too?" "Why, yes," answered the queen. "Let's go in our carriage." As they were driving along the forest road, what should they see but a little white napkin lying in their way? And no sooner had they seen it than the king said to the queen, "I'm going to get out of our carriage, and I'm going to pick up that little white napkin." "My dear husband," said the queen, "you are going to do nothing of the sort. It is not right to pick up whatever one finds lying in the road." "Have it your own way then, my dear," answered the king resignedly. "But I tell you what, if that little white napkin is still there when we return, I'm going to get out of our carriage, and I'm going to pick it up." Sure enough, on the way home, the king saw the little white napkin lying in the road just where it had been before, and as he had promised, he got out of the carriage and picked it up. But what do you suppose was underneath the napkin? A wicked old fairy, all dirty and covered with sores. "Now," said the wicked old fairy, "I am going to scratch your wife's 2 eyes out of her head, and you will drive her into the forest forever, and marry me in her place." And what the fairy said came to pass. Weeping as hard as ever a woman wept, the queen was driven into the forest with her little son. Never more was she to set foot in the royal palace. And the poor king, who loved the queen very dearly, but he really had no choice in the matter, was married all too soon to the horrible fairy by whom he had been bewitched. Well, the years passed, and when her son had become a good-sized lad, the poor blinded queen sent him to the king's castle. "Good morning, papa," said the young man to his father. "My own dear son," cried the king, overcome with joy, "you must live with us from this hour. A fine, likely-looking lad you are, and we shall all 3 be happy together." It was just like the horrible fairy, his stepmother, that she should be in the room at the time, and of course she did not agree with this at all, but for the moment she only gave the lad a spiteful glance and said nothing. Some days passed while she made her plans. Then she said to the king, "That boy of yours simply does nothing but boast. Why, he says that he can find the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea, 100,000 fathoms deep beneath the waves." "Oh, ho!" said the king. "Is that so? My boy, have you been boasting that you can find the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea, 100,000 fathoms deep beneath the waves? If that is the case, you had better go and find it." "Father," cried the young man in surprise, "I have never boasted any such thing. But I'll go and find it if I must." So off he went, the poor young fellow, with his sack of provisions on his shoulders. After a time he came to a little log cabin in the woods. "Ben, ben, ben." He knocked at the door. "Come in," cried a voice. And then who should open the door for him but an amazingly ugly fairy, from whose mouth spread a long tongue of flame. "My poor young man," said she, "you look as though you were frightened to death of me." "Yes, I am very much afraid." "And where are you going?" she asked. I'm going to find the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea, 100,000 fathoms deep beneath the waves. I wonder if you can tell me how to find it." "No," she answered, "I can't tell you myself, but I have 2 sisters who live in the depths of the forest. When you reach the first, ask her how to find the other." The young man thanked her very politely and continued his journey for another day. In the evening he came to the log cabin of the second fairy, who was even more hideous than her sister, and the flame that spread out of her mouth was as long as her arm. Why, the poor fellow did not even dare to approach her cabin. She watched him coming through the woods and saw him halt in terror at the edge of her clearing. "What is this? What is this?" she asked in a brisk and kindly way. "You appear to be afraid of something." "Indeed I am, madam. I am afraid of you. You are a terrible sight with all that fire coming out of your mouth." "Oh, don't be afraid of that," she answered. And as she laughed in a friendly fashion, a great cloud of fire and steam and smoke belched forth from her mouth and frightened the young man almost out of his senses. "But tell me, why are you wandering like this in the depths of the forest?" she asked. "I am trying to find the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea, 100,000 fathoms deep beneath the waves." "Well, that's easy enough," said she. "One of my sisters lives some distance from here in the depths of the forest, and she will tell you where the castle is." So off he went again, after thanking her politely, and in the evening of the next day's march he came upon a little log cabin wherein lived the third sister, the most unsightly of them all. The flame that spread out of her mouth was so long that it scorched the trees at the edge of the clearing, and he would come no nearer than shouting distance. "My poor young man," she cried, "have you not the courage to approach my cabin? Are you afraid?" "Yes, indeed, I am very much afraid." "Well, what do you want anyhow?" she shouted, seeing he would not approach her hut. "Can you tell me how to find the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea, 100,000 fathoms deep beneath the waves?" "Oh, there's no difficulty about that," she replied. "The King of the Fishes ought to be here any time now, and I shall ask him where the castle is." Then she went away to the Red Sea and bellowed, "King of the Fishes! King of the Fishes!" When the King of the Fishes came, as he did very soon, she asked him, "Do you know where the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea is, 100,000 fathoms deep beneath the waves? Have you ever seen it?" "I know it very well," replied the King of the Fishes. "It is down there, straight down through yonder clear patch of water." Then the fairy said to the young man, "Look now, take my little 2-oared boat, and you will find yourself there at once." "Thank you very much, madam," said he. The young man began to row down, down, down through the clear patch of water, which extended to the bottom of the sea. And so he got right to the castle, as close as he could, and saw 3 princesses at a window on the second story. "Poor young man," said they, "where are you going?" "I am searching for the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea, 100,000 fathoms deep beneath the waves. Is it here?" "Yes, this is it," they said all together, "and we will help you to come up to us." They threw him a rope, saying, "Tie your foot." Then all 3 of them pulled at the other end of the rope and drew him up head over heels. Once he was with them in the room on the second story, they all said at once, "So, there you are, and now, which one of us are you going to marry?" One of them was 15 years old, another was 21, and the third was 25. He married the youngest. That evening, when he went to bed, what should he see at the side of the room but 3 lights? He asked his princess, "What are those 3 lights for?" "Well, my dear husband, I can hardly afford to tell you." "And why not?" he asked. She answered, "I shall tell you because I love you, but you must take good care to keep it a secret. Those lights are wax candles. 2 of them are the lives of my sisters. If you were to blow them out, my 2 sisters would fall down stiff and dead." "And the other light?" "That is the life of the old fairy covered with sores who has married the king, your father. In a plate on the table are the 2 eyes which she snatched from the queen, your mother. If you blew out the candle, the mangy old fairy would fall down stiff and dead." During the night, the young man rose and went to the side of the room where he blew out the 2 candles, those of the 2 sisters. Then he quietly went back to bed. And what did he find under his bed in the morning? A handle with ropes tied to it. "Tell me, my wife, what is this for?" My dear husband, you have only to seize this handle to find yourself transported to the castle of the king, your father, and of the wicked fairy." Rising up, the princess went to the candles and found her 2 sisters dead. "Oh, my dear husband, have you killed my 2 sisters?" "Yes, wife. It would have been bad luck for me if I had not blown out the candles. As it is, I am relieved of a great worry." The young man, who was exceedingly prompt in his actions, lost no time in seizing hold of the handle under the bed, and wishing himself carried with the round castle and all to his father's door. Meanwhile, at home, the wicked fairy suddenly began to complain of illness to her husband, the king. "Oh, how unwell I feel!" she cried. "I have pains all up and down, and in and out. Oh, oh!" "For goodness' sake," said the king, "tell me what is the matter with you." "Everything is the matter with me," she answered, making all sorts of faces and running up and down the room. "Oh, I'm terribly ill." At this point, the young man walked into his father's palace, carrying a lighted candle in one hand and a pair of eyes in the other. "Ha, you old witch!" he cried. "You snatched out my mother's eyes and sent her away to the forests. Today I have your life in my hands. Prepare to die." Thereupon he blew out the 3rd candle, and the fairy fell down stiff and dead. "My boy," said the king aghast, "what have you done?" "Father, do you love this old hag better than your wife, the queen? Come with me into the forest to find my poor blinded mother, and we will lead her home." Both of them went in the carriage into the forest, and at last they came to the place where the poor blind queen lived all alone in her little log cabin. The sun put back into her head the 2 eyes which she had found in the round castle, and, wonderful to relate, after all those years she recovered her sight. The first thing she saw was the king, who put his arms around her neck with great joy and kissed her. You can well imagine that she was much more attractive than the old fairy covered with sores. So they returned together to the king's castle. The young man lived happily ever after with the princess of the round castle at the bottom of the Red Sea, 100,000 fathoms deep under the waves. And the king lived happily ever after with his dear wife, the queen. Take my word for it, never again would he think of picking up a napkin lying in the road. And as for me, they sent me here to tell you this story. End of section 20. Read by laurakgibbs. End of Tales of 1928 by various authors.